This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of What If Naruto revives Katara and Sokka's mother. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And for more exclusive and spicy content, follow me on Patreon. Link is in the description below. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Azure eyes fluttered open to the strange landscape, taking it all in hazily. With nothing but white in their field of vision, they moved slowly from left to right. This person appeared to be male, as evidenced by the quiet breeze and obvious, somewhat heavy, masculine breaths that were the only sounds that reached the owner's ears. Where am I? As the blue eyes blinked away the last bit of blurriness that was blocking their vision, he thought. At that moment, he became aware of the icy embrace encircling his prone body. Snow. As his gloved hands held a handful of the substance, he thought, and then released them after a short while, allowing the tiny white particles to fall back to the soft ground. Even though his memory was still fuzzy, he was able to recall the mission he had undertaken in Yuki no Kuni, which was once known as the Land of Snow before changing its name to Haru no Kuni when the nation's snow melted due to newly discovered heat generators and its lands were covered in an endless sunshine. In his view, that was an extremely difficult mission, and it undoubtedly contributed to his resolve to strengthen himself in order to defend his valued people. Those shinobi with chakra armor were no laughing matter, and... Hold on. In the recesses of his mind, an infinite number of ideas began colliding. Akatsuki. Jubi. Madara. Shinobi. Fighting. Biju. Oh shit. He cried as he abruptly sat up, knocking the snow off his arms and torso before flinching as the pain spread throughout his body became apparent. The pain shot from his shoulders to his wrists as he extended his arms. At that point, he became aware of the minor cuts and bruises along his forearms, but he could only assume that the rest of his body was similarly affected because whatever wounds there may have been were now just minor marks. He sighed and thought, good old regeneration, before returning to the current circumstance. As he struggled to understand where he was, his eyes darted around. His mind was racing, and he thought bitterly, snow. Snow. Oh look, more snow. He slapped his whiskered cheeks lightly to clear his mind and said to himself, in a low voice, okay, get your shit together and try to understand what happened. As more snow fell to the ground, he continued to run his hand through his blonde hair, which was spiky and sun-kissed. He said, okay, the Jubi was absorbed into Madara. Shit hit the fan. Again. And. As a snowflake drifted into his mouth, causing his voice to start coughing. What the hell? In an attempt to get rid of the foul taste that was attacking his tongue, he coughed and spat to the side. How come snowflakes taste like that? He quickly regained his bearings and gazed up at the gray sky, where a strange force of nature was at work. Black snow. Dots of black did, in fact, fall onto the white surface and blend in, giving the surrounding area a faint sense of dread. Setting aside his mission to determine how he got to where he was, he used his chakra to sharpen his senses in order to locate any activity that might cause this odd occurrence or simply any source of life. He closed his eyes and concentrated, picking up a good deal of muffled shouting to his left as well as numerous energy signatures that were similar but not quite chakra. There was a crunch with each step as he stumbled to his feet and started to walk slowly. Even though he wanted to get to the unidentified location as soon as possible, his body refused to cooperate because it appeared that his energy was running low. He wasn't entirely sure if an emergency situation was taking place. All he could do was accept his slow pace and hope for the best. It's not too much to ask for a day of peace, is it? Please let everything be all right. If only he could see where his life was going right now. The Southern Water Tribe was a fairly large and normally tranquil community, and there was panic everywhere. In an attempt to avoid becoming the prime target of the invaders' merciless and unforgiving flames, which seemed to never go out, people were fleeing for cover. Indeed, there were those who retaliated using whatever weapons they could find, such as clubs that were typically within the reach of their warriors or even spears that were typically used for fishing rather than combat. But as the armored firebenders advanced with only a successful mission in mind and a promise of terror in their eyes, concealed by red masks covering the upper part of their faces, it appeared as though all of their hard work had been in vain. This was the scene where an adorable 8-year-old girl with dark brown hair, light brown skin, and bright blue eyes was frantically running around with a goal she couldn't afford to fail. As her terrified face searched for the person she so desperately needed, her famous hair, loopies, were swaying in the air. She continued to weave through igloos, broken tents, and minor skirmishes until she finally located her target and hurried up to him. The man threw a firebender into a nearby snow pile just before she made her appearance, and his face now revealed that he was accustomed to such altercations. He wore a heavy blue coat that shielded him from the cold, just like her, and he looked as he always did, with light brown skin, brown hair that reached his chin, and a small wolf tail tied behind his head. as he completed the take down of the aforementioned firebender. Two longer strands of hair, each held by a single blue bead, swayed next to his bearded jawline and right cheek. Chief Hakoda, as his title suggests, is a powerful fighter and the village chief. But to a few young children, he is referred to as Dad. Dad. Hakoda exclaimed as he swiftly glanced up at his young daughter, who was standing on a small snowy ridge nearby, her eyes glimmering with panic and fear. Katara. Hakoda pondered. Katara yelled frantically, "Please! I think Mom is in trouble. There's a man in our house." Kya. Hakoda cried out in concern as he immediately began running toward his house, Katara following closely behind. They hardly noticed the different tents and igloos that Katara had just walked through. On the opposite side of the village's defensive wall, explosive fire support was fired from a distance, affecting sporadic areas of the community. With the southern raiders' bird-clad flag, it was easy to assume that everything originated from the invaders' ships. But, since their only objective is to ensure the safety of their cherished mother or wife, none of the chaos that surrounds the couple matters. They soon discovered their small igloo and hastily pushed aside the tarp that was serving as a door, but it was too late. The different sets of clothes, furniture, and other items were strewn about as though they had been thrown or destroyed to make the lone occupant feel afraid. It didn't take Katara and her father a second to look at Kya's lifeless, prone body lying in the center of the floor. They just stared for what seemed like the longest time in their eyes. Both stood motionless as though they had just experienced the coldest and harshest winter yet, while a range of emotions erupted in their blue eyes. Tears poured freely down their cheeks and onto the ground after accumulating at the corners of their eyes. Upon hearing the very quiet drip of Katara's first tear hitting the floor, she jolted out of her reverie, screamed in unbridled terror, and ran to her mother, sobbing deeply. "Mom!" Though slowly and with a slight limp, the blonde eventually made it to the location of the disturbance. He kept walking until he arrived at the summit of the hill covered in ash, at which point he simply stood motionless. From his vantage point, he could see the now exposed, terrified village close to the open sea. His mind was racing as he saw the terrified, helpless people being showered with fire. Who are these individuals, and who is assaulting them? When several men in similar attire approached some burned tents, he received his response. He first saw their red and black cloak-like armor, which appeared to be merely a means of staying warm rather than shielding their bodies from possible assaults, despite the fact that it appeared to be fairly reinforced and could conceal more delicate armor beneath it. They wore round, primarily black helmets with a red mask covering their eyes, foreheads, and sides of their skulls. With the mask resembling wings, it made them appear like birds. But their mouths were still exposed. The black pants and pointed boots, which matched the color scheme of their torso and fell below their knees, completed their ensemble. The prepared balls of fire around their hands before they set fire to several tents and igloos behind the fleeing villagers and prepared more for their next attack were what really caught their attention. No hand signals? As he observed more houses and machinery being burned, the man asked himself in his head. I have to take action, but as soon as he heard the distant orders to retreat, any plans he had to stop them came to a halt. With a frustrated sneer, he made the decision to get past the wall. He lost his balance as he was about to descend the hill after his foot fell into a tiny, slightly deeper hole. The outcome was a blond man rolling down the merciless white fluffy surface while cursing violently. His voice was muffled every other second, which added intrigue to his stumble. If not for the terrible atmosphere that permeated the air, it would have been kind of funny. When he reached the bottom and was granted mercy, he strainedly exclaimed, "Damn it." He discovered a hole in the surrounding wall as he hauled himself out of the snow for the second time that day. This hole was probably created by the long-range fire support from the ships that were now departing the village's shores. He moved slowly through the freshly broken wall, surveying his surroundings. All he was able to infer from the people and the surroundings was fear and devastation. It was a chaotic scene before him, not the worst he had ever seen, but it still had the unintended effect of making him feel dreadful. Houses were destroyed, and people were attempting to treat those who were hurt. After taking in as much as he could stand, he moved forward at a modest but steady pace and took his time scanning his surroundings. After a while, the populace noticed him and became immediately wary. Fathers prepared themselves in any way they could in case this new stranger turned hostile. Mothers huddled their children behind them for protection, and everyone else just sought cover or cared for the injured. He couldn't hold them responsible, particularly in light of this attack and the fact that he was also an unknown individual with no known motives. Who is that? And, is he with the Fire Nation? Were among the things he heard the people murmuring and whispering as he passed by. After that, they all appeared to be either prepared to run or fight at any moment. All he could do was hope no one thought he was an urgent danger that needed to be dealt with. At that moment, he heard a child's cries and a man's hushed voice from a nearby igloo that had survived. He moved toward the tarped entrance, defying his better judgment to stay out of the way because it appeared that all of the men with fire weapons had left. He heard the child's voice once more as he came to a stop in front of it. Between sobs, she exclaimed, "We have to get her help, Dad. She won't last much longer." The blonde heard the man he now knew to be the girl's father let out a weary sigh. "Katara. I don't." She muttered, as though she was scared to hear what he had to say. "You don't what?" Then, without letting them know he was there, the man with whiskers pushed the tarp slightly open so he could take a quick look inside. As he watched, he noticed Katara, the girl, standing in front of her father, with the woman they were clearly worried about standing motionless behind him. Although he couldn't see much of her, he could see blood on the floor near her body and a few burned pieces of clothing. "Oh no." With similar red, swollen eyes, Hakoda gently grasped Katara's shoulders and dropped on his right knee in front of her. "Sweetie. Listen to me," she said, her whole focus on his sorrowful eyes. "Why? Your mother is at peace now. She's not hurting anymore." He shook his head slightly to contain the tears that were starting to well up. For his daughter, he had to be resilient. At first, Katara stared at him, unable to comprehend what she had just been told, and she didn't answer. Her father embraced her tightly, her face nestled in the bend of his neck, and it felt like an eternity before the tears and sobs returned full force. His own eyes were tightly closed, but he allowed a few streams of water to escape as well. The scene broke the heart of the blonde with the whiskers. Throughout his career, he has witnessed many deaths, but he was unable to completely disregard them or believe that he was a sane person. Particularly after witnessing an innocent child go through such a horror, he was unable to control the sadness that overcame him. He recognized the anguish of losing loved ones despite the absence of a consistent parental figure in his life. No matter how much one accepts it or how much time goes by, the pain will never go away. We had to learn this the hard way. I ought to have arrived sooner, at least I could have tried to assist her. He felt frustrated at what he could have done, even though this family was a complete stranger in an unfamiliar place. Others would merely comfort him by telling him that he had no control over the situation and that it wasn't his fault. But he would disagree. Oh my God, he was an amazing shinobi. He had the right potential, the right abilities, and he overcame all the challenges to achieve what everyone thought was impossible for him. After a few passionate words, he even caused a supposed murderous and heartless missing nin to cry uncontrollably. Who the hell can claim that they followed suit? A small nudge in the back of his conscience told him to go inside, but he wasn't sure if it was due to his thoughts getting hotter. He naturally began to oppose that notion, but he has always trusted his gut and has done well thus far, right? Even though it wasn't exactly his intention, he ended up in a completely unfamiliar village with a kind of population he had never encountered before, yet almost entirely exhausted of energy as Soria, completely unprepared for any unexpected confrontation. You get the idea. All he needed to do was take comfort in the fact that his gut instinct was always there for him when he needed it. He reluctantly pushed the tarp aside and entered after holding his breath. His hesitation kept him motionless as he awkwardly stood there, attempting to determine whether going inside would accomplish anything or whether he should make a hasty escape, so he didn't really get much farther than that. What on earth am I doing? I can't do anything more for her. Should I say something? Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt this heartfelt moment, but I offer my condolences and please disregard me completely. I'm a complete stranger, and you don't know how I got here. Yup. Absolutely smooth, he thought mockingly. Luckily or unluckily, his presence was picked up, and he froze in place like a deer in headlights. Hakoda's eyes snapped open, taking in the stranger before him, and he tensed up. His spiky blonde hair definitely stood out, and he was an even 6 feet tall. He questioned whether he had ever seen many, if any, people with that hair color. It felt as though the sun was embracing it all the time. But it appeared a little soiled from perspiration and grime, as though he had just finished a battle or some hard training. Then he noticed his eyes, which were like deep blue pools, just like his daughter's, but they had a certain charm in them. Even though his dilating pupils were currently displaying signs of panic, he knew a hardened warrior when he saw one, especially if you got a good look in their eyes. This person has undoubtedly witnessed and experienced the worst that this world has to offer. This made him even more motivated to defend Katara and himself at any time. But there was also a feeling of regret and understanding. In any case, he will continue to be vigilant. He had no intention of losing anyone else. He noticed something highly peculiar as he looked at the rest of his face. Are those whiskers? The only explanation he could think of for the 3 whisker marks on each cheek was that they were either birthmarks or tattoos, but how are these kinds of birthmarks possible? Then he looked at his clothes, which had clearly seen better days. A long, sleeved black shirt with a single dark orange stripe running from his wrist to his shoulder and down his sides, with holes and tears where it was visible. A black flak jacket with numerous useful pockets, and a rectangular piece of metal that held a symbol he had never seen before, which he assumed was significant because it was placed over the man's heart. On his hands were fingerless black gloves, each of which held the same symbol that was on his chest, though his right hand had a swirl instead. The only item of clothing that was hidden was the necklace that held a special green crystal tucked into his shirt. He also wore black cargo pants that were taped at the ankles and tucked into black combat boots. He had a pouch on his right thigh to hold items for easy access, and he could barely see what appeared to be a larger pouch held at the back of his hip. Like the clothes on his upper body, they were all scuffed and in need of repair. Hakoda abruptly stood up after finishing his observation, alerting Katara to the appearance of the enigmatic man. "What are you doing here, and who are you?" Holding Katara behind him, Hakoda made a demand. He just couldn't think of anything to say and began to fidget immediately. Is that fire on his clothing? Fire Nation? Katara thought, moving slightly back into her father's guard and tightening her grip on his pants as she peered around her father's leg to get a good look at the man invading her home. Who was he? Where did he come from? He obviously wasn't from their tribe. He continued, looking at Kya. It's just, he said, I'm lost right now and just felt. I don't know. He rubbed the back of his head nervously, turned away from the chief, and made contact with Katara's sad and terrified blue eyes, sending her an apologetic look and letting out an exasperated sigh. I'm sorry for what happened to your mother, she didn't deserve this. Even though this might have calmed them down a little, Hakoda squinted and said, You still didn't answer my question. He scowled menacingly. Look, said the stranger once more, I don't know how I got here or what's going on, but I felt that. Wait a minute. That nudging happened again. What's this? Did he have to do something? He stopped talking about this sensation, which only made the two more wary and curious. He looked at them, then at Kya, and the enigmatic feeling returned with greater intensity. In fact, the longer he gazed at her motionless body, the more powerful the nudges became, and he was unconsciously approaching her. Hakoda prepared for a fight right away, saying, Get back or... Katara and he both gasped, perplexing the blonde. Even other tribesmen nearby froze, trying to process the overwhelming presence they sensed, as he tried to figure out what was wrong until he felt it. His chakra was blazing right now, and he doubted it was visible, but the aura resonating from him was felt all around. Hakoda was frozen and unable to respond further, so the stranger kept walking, past the two, and stood in front of Kya. He had no idea why he approached her. His body simply moved as if on autopilot, and he just stared down at her in utterly suspenseful silence. After an indeterminate amount of time, the power increased in intensity, and he could swear he heard a slight vibration or hum in the air. Words began to scratch at his mind, but they were not clear enough to understand, and they kept repeating and repeating as his gaze hardened on the water tribe woman. Then, when it could get no stranger, his eyes just seemed to have all the mysterious power escaping from them. That's when it took place. The man yelled without warning and without any control over his own body. Geto. Jutsu no Rinne Tensai. Hakoda and Katara's eyes widened as they finally snapped out of their daze, and Kya's body was illuminated in a magnificent blue that lit up the igloo before anyone knew what was happening. For what felt like hours, her body kept glowing before gradually fading away, leaving the stunned audience in complete silence. They were all confused by a series of coughs that broke the silence, but they were all shocked to learn that they weren't coming from Katara, Hakoda, or even the man who was silently standing over the dead. At least that's what they believed until they discovered that she was the cause of the coughs. Everyone in the room was completely shocked when Kya sat up a little, using her elbow for support, and looked around the room idly. Her weary eyes kept scanning the room before settling on two individuals she could never have mistaken. Katara. Hakoda. Her voice was raspy as she spoke softly. Their eyes began to well up with tears once more, but instead of the grief and guilt that had previously been there, happiness and relief erupted on the scene. Kya, Mom! They yelled as they rushed to her, nearly tackled her, and then gave her a tender, affectionate hug. It only took a few seconds before he thud then, when they got a good look at his eyes, they felt their breath catch in their throats, because the blonde they had momentarily forgotten was lying on his side, and if his fluttering eyelids were any indication, he appeared to be struggling to stay awake. Even though he was exhausted, he was able to notice their reactions and became perplexed until he caught a glimpse of a broken piece of glass nearby. All he could comprehend in his reflection was purple ripples. Rinne. Before his vision blurred and he fell into sweet unconsciousness, he noticed a familiar blue replacing the purple. The morning after, once more, blue eyes opened to a white ceiling rather than the gray sky. Am I going to start waking up in mysterious places on a daily basis? He sighed. A quiet voice said, well, good morning. Abruptly, he looked at the woman he thought was dead, sitting on the floor with Katara curled up in her arms. Although she was able to change into a proper outfit, the woman's dark brown hair remained disheveled, suggesting that she simply couldn't be bothered with it. Her eyes appeared tired, but relaxed and unfrightened by the man who had just woken up. Additionally, there was a young boy who appeared to be Katara's age, leaning against her side while he slept and snoring softly. He was dressed similarly to everyone else in the room, and he had the same wolf tail that Hakoda had tied behind his head, with the exception that the sides of his skull were shaven. Well, good morning. He was still gathering his thoughts, so he wasn't really sure how to move the conversation along. He sat up and saw that he was comfortably in a blue sleeping bag, wearing only his ragged shirt and pants. He was about to say something else, but instead he coughed raspily. He looked up at Kya when she pushed her head toward the cup of water beside him, and he nodded gratefully, understood, and then he drank the water all at once with a sigh of relief. I think proper introductions should be made, Kya began. My name is Kya, and these are my kids, Katara and Sokka. My husband, Hakoda, was the man you saw yesterday. What's your name? She smiled and asked softly. He silently observed her for a few moments before grinning slightly. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki? That's definitely a unique name, Kya began, raising an eyebrow. But putting mild curiosity aside, it's very nice to meet you. Kya's soft smile remained intact. Naruto gave it back with his own. Likewise, he said, quickly examining her form, you certainly seem. Better. He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. That was an understatement. Bringing someone back to the land of the living is not something that happens very often, at least not to these people. She gave him a sardonic look, as if his astounding observation were true. Wow, really? She said, I don't feel that much different, with a hint of playfulness mixed with a lot of sarcasm. Kya gave a little giggle of her own, and Naruto could only laugh awkwardly. They both witnessed, or in Kya's case, felt, Katara begin to wake up, fluttering her sapphire eyes open and yawning slightly, stretching her arms to release tension before rubbing the last of the sleep from her vision, focusing on the uneven surface she was lying on before slowly raising her gaze to her mother's beaming face. Mom. Katara then hugged her as tight as her small arms would allow and basked in her warmth. It wasn't a dream. She sounded as though she was fighting back tears, but her voice was muffled by her face buried in Kya's bosom. Thought you were really gone. Kya gave her a tender hug in return, closing her eyes and intensifying the embrace as she whispered, I'm not going anywhere. A snort was heard, and they all turned to watch Sokka as he made his own way out of the dream world. He walked drowsily towards the small kitchen area, saying only a lazy, breakfast, and sitting up with half-lidded eyes, seemingly oblivious to the company. He continued his heroic search while everyone looked on, but he stumbled over some debris and fell with a loud thud. At first, nobody knew how to respond until they heard the small boy's loud, muffled snoring. Naruto then laughed loudly, which, surprisingly, didn't wake Sokka from his sleep, but it did cause Katara to turn around and her eyes brightened with recognition. The magician. What? Was Naruto's response, squinting and cocking his head to the side. Kya found it rather cute, resembling a fox. Naruto let out a little, oof, as Katara rushed up to him and struck his chest without wasting any time. Thank you. Whoa. Take a moment to slow down, please, one word at a time. He sat her in front of him so he could see her clearly and spoke kindly. It's just you, the strange sensation, and then the light of my mother. As she waved her arms excitedly and looked back and forth between her mother and the stranger, the poor girl appeared unable to finish a proper sentence. Meanwhile, the still, audible snoring was being ignored. She shook her head, looked back at him with a radiant smile and admiring eyes, and extended her now mittenless hand, seemingly having collected herself. I'm Katara. Uzumaki Natuto, he said, holding her tiny hand and shaking it slightly. Just call me Naruto, though. Naruto laughed amusingly and flashed his signature smile. She nodded in agreement. All right, come on Katara. Let Naruto rest more while you can help me fix something to eat before your father gets back. Kya then got to her feet, approached Sokka to pick him up, and laid him down on another nearby sleeping bag that had been rolled out. Before joining her mother, Katara nodded and smiled at Naruto one last time. Naruto protested, I think I'm pretty well rested already. Kya turned to glare at him. She shot back, putting her hands on her hips, a universal sign that said, listen to me or else. She wasn't lying either. Naruto's eyes appeared completely worn out. Those bags under your eyes say otherwise. But he disregarded her command, as he had done with numerous female acquaintances in the past. What? I'm doing great. He scoffed in defense while crossing his arms and holding his nose in the air. I'm full of energy. Datbeo, I could be up for days. Then, with a slightly shocked expression on his face, Naruto stiffened up and said, He was unsure of what to do because, despite his best efforts, his verbal tic would not go away. He turned away from the water tribe females and curled up inside the sleeping bag, saying in a defeated tone, I'm just going to go to sleep now. Katara looked up to meet her mother's eyes, while Kya simply shrugged and continued to see what they could come up with. Both Kya and Katara simply had similar bewildered expressions with their right eyebrows raised. After settling in, Naruto closed his eyes and gradually drifted off to sleep. While totally forgetting he was still in an unidentified place and had acquired new abilities. Her horn-like appendages atop her head only seemed to accentuate her overwhelming aura. Her sudden appearance stunned everyone into silence, just like in Madara's place after Black Zetsu's betrayal. Her clear eyes were absolutely ruthless, and even though they appeared empty, one could feel the power and pure emotion that could pierce any poor soul unfortunate enough to make eye contact. Was Otsutsuki Kaguya, and she was quite explicit about her intentions. She seemed to want the fighting to stop when she said that the world was her nursery, that she didn't want to harm anymore, and in a sense, she did. By transporting Naruto and the others to a world of lava that she conjured up out of thin air. That was incredibly terrifying, and for a split second, they all hoped it was just a genjutsu, but regrettably that wasn't the case. Even the most power-hungry people couldn't even begin to comprehend the powers this woman a goddess possessed. Naruto and Sasuke were about to act once more after using a clone and chakra arms to get the others to a reasonably safe location, but they were taken aback when Kaguya emerged from a dimensional hole behind them. It was only the combined efforts of the reunited Team 7 that prevented them all from dying horribly in the lake of fire. When they turned around and saw a hand gently cupping their chins, she reached for them. They were a little taken aback, but what they saw next completely blew their minds. The princess who ate the Shinju fruit, Otsutsuki Kaguya, became the chakra's ancestor, used her power to terrorize everyone on the planet, ending all wars. Gave birth to 2 sons, whom she would later wish to use the 10 tails to destroy. Was imprisoned by those sons and could only hope to return with the development of Black Zetsu. Returned successfully to claim all of the chakra she thought was hers alone. Was now publicly crying, her regal and lovely face displaying a look of deep regret. Black Zetsu's appearance around her arm prevented them from moving, so Naruto and Sasuke didn't know how to respond. Nevertheless, they both came to the realization that no matter how much power she gains, how angry she gets, or how hard she suppresses her emotions to only display strength, she was still grieving over the loss of her children as a mother. One might assume that she was at fault for losing her children in the first place, and they would be correct, but who can know what goes through the minds of those who have lost everything? This was demonstrated when Black Zetsu claimed that they made her think of Hagoromo and Hamura. The details of Black Zetsu's plan to bring his mother back were then revealed, and it seemed as if the entire shinobi history revolved around bringing Kaguya back. With Byakugan blazing, her third eye open, and tears still streaming down her cheeks, Kaguya shook her head and said, I hate you. Hagoromo. Hamura. You both belong to me. Of all things. You people. Of all things. Are not the history of ninjas. Naruto said as he violently pushed Kaguya's Black Zetsu. Covered arm away and did the same for Sasuke with a chakra arm before they lost contact. At that point, Black Zetsu considered his role completed and was retreating into Kaguya's sleeve. He wasn't done yet. And one more thing. When her children become independent and go out, a mother is happy. After that, Naruto swiftly whispered his new strategy to Sasuke, breaking his broody battle face in the process. You really accomplished that and produced what? Incredulous, he whispered back. With a cheeky smile in return, Naruto said, have anything better? She will never allow us to approach, and she may simply pass through dimensions before we have a chance. After giving him a blank stare, Sasuke closed his eyes, looked down, and sighed in defeat. Kami. He said, turning to face him again. You do realize if this works, this is going to be in the history books, right? Naruto just grinned. Think of it as a prank for future generations. Sasuke gave an eye roll. He grunted, then turned to face Kaguya again. Ready? He asked, glancing over his shoulder. As they prepared to move, Naruto turned to face him and nodded firmly. In the shadow of Kaguya's open sleeve, Black Zetsu Spooky remarked. I don't know what you're trying to do. But Mother has absorbed every known jutsu. Anything you try is meaningless. When Sasuke screamed, Amaterasu, Kaguya instantly burst into jet black flames that would typically burn a human, but the rabbit goddess was gradually extinguishing them. But Naruto was already moving during this time. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he exclaimed, making the well-known crossed hand gesture with his fingers. As she put out the flames without harming herself, 8 clones appeared all around her and were about to retaliate. What followed was something so erratic and utterly crazy that, as Sasuke had hinted at and Naruto had gladly grasped, future shinobi and kunoichi would be staring at their teachers for centuries as they explained the defeat of Otsutsuki Kaguya, the creator of chakra and perhaps the most powerful person to have ever lived. The seductive reverse harem technique, Oiroku Gyaku ha Remu no Jutsu. All of the clones suddenly changed into attractive, nude men? With the exception of Sasuke, everyone was stunned and motionless, particularly Kaguya, who was now blushing slightly. Sakura, with a trail of blood escaping her nostrils, was mentally criticizing Naruto's new jutsu while Kakashi, a Naruto clone, and an unconscious Obito were off in the distance. Have you become utterly foolish? What the devil method are you employing at this moment? I'm a different story, but do you really believe that a god like that can be defeated by jutsu? Naruto grabbed Sasuke's shoulder before she could finish thinking, and the two vanished in a burst of yellow. And, thanks to the unique seal he placed on Black Zetsu when he shoved him away before coming back to Kaguya's side, they reappeared on either side of him, their yin and yang covered palms gripping each shoulder. Yes, Naruto learned the Hiraishin. He realized that his knowledge was insufficient during the training trip and repeatedly pleaded with Ero Sennin to teach him everything he could before he finally gave in after he kept interfering with his research, which naturally included Fuinjutsu. Before Jiraiya allowed Naruto to try the fabled teleportation technique, it took almost the whole journey, a ton of memory, receiving shadow clones, and a ton of patience. Additionally, this came after Jiraiya was revealed as his godfather and his parents. Naturally, Naruto was emotionally exposed and in shock. However, nothing could be fixed by a good, long cry, some alone time, and a quick kick to his recently found godfather's jewels. May Kami's perverted soul rest in peace. Naruto did acquire knowledge beyond Fuinjutsu, but that will have to wait until later. It worked? Exclaimed Sakura. Kaguya and Black Zetsu became motionless, just as they had made Naruto and Sasuke earlier, and the rabbit goddess was unable to respond before the symbols on their hands glowed a heavenly white. She was trembling, and her power was clearly flowing out of her body in clear, white streams that danced around anyone who came into contact with her. She screamed silently, her stick mouth and eyes fixed on the volcanic ceiling. She was limited to a shaky glance at Naruto and then Sasuke. She was defeated by these boys, these men, who were the reincarnations of her own flesh and blood. She would laugh now if she could. There was a huge déjà vu. The denial and grudging acceptance of her failure, feeling helpless and completely exposed, becoming a victim of this divine force similar to her own. Just like so long ago, she thought glumly as the escaped energy grew larger and brighter and her chakra was being drained from her more quickly. Large chunks of rock splashed in the surrounding lava as a loud, whistling wind rustled their clothes and hair. She was beginning to believe the adage that those who do not learn from history are destined to repeat it. But perhaps in this instance, she had to learn from her mistake. She thought suddenly as everything seemed to slow down around her, her hearing becoming a little muted, as though she were in a daze. Was she at fault? Was power the only thing that mattered? Was this endeavor doomed from the beginning? She looked once more at the two men who were becoming more and more radiant. She muttered, such a pitiful return. I haven't even been alive an hour yet. She could only muster the strength to mutter one final sentence as she felt the last of her chakra's strings about to be drained. I'm a horrible mother. Naruto and Sasuke both raised their bright eyes a little to acknowledge what she had said. But as she closed them in acceptance of her fate, only Naruto saw the single tear slip from the corner of her eye. Before he could process what she had said, tiny fissures in her once flawless skin burst into thin pillars of light. Sasuke and Naruto clenched their teeth as they felt the chakra being sealed inside of them, forcing them to close their eyes from the brightness. It was nearly intolerable. Gamabunta felt like he was being forced through a small door by the unexpected surge of electricity. Little chakra burns were starting to appear all over their bodies, and their clothes were starting to tear a little. It appeared that Kaguya's chakra was nearly too much for them to manage, despite the fact that they were endowed with godlike abilities. The whole area began to tremble as though an earthquake were taking place. Sakura, Kakashi, and the Naruto clone scanned their surroundings, unsure of what to do. They were forced to wait until Sasuke and Naruto were done. They felt as though their chakra was being depleted as soon as the ceiling started, so it's not like they could move around all that well. Maybe it was because Kaguya's power was visible in the atmosphere. After all, they realized that she was capable of absorbing chakra. However, as they witnessed the Naruto clone fighting to stay afloat and maintain control over their bodies, things were rapidly becoming worse. Sakura thought, "Please hurry." A dimensional hole appeared close to Naruto and Sasuke as they struggled to seal, and before they knew it, an apparently endless number of holes in the dimensional plane opened up around them. They materialized on walls, in the air, and even right on top of the lava pool. However, they saw fuzzy images flickering in a variety of colors in place of the typical pitch black holes they saw Kaguya travel through. A static sound seemed to come from each of them, and were those voices? Everyone, including the preoccupied Naruto and Sasuke, stared around in awe as they saw almost every new reality play a tiny, hazy movie of some kind with only the faintest hint of sound other than static. There were sounds of fighting, yelling, whispering, casual conversation, and even children laughing. It was a completely inexplicable experience. Kaguya was totally engulfed in the white light of her spirit at that moment, and her body had reached its limit. As befitting a princess of chakra, she started to disintegrate into glittering fragments from her feet to her head. Naruto and Sasuke felt more pressure as her glowing head joined the white streams of energy surrounding them. Their chakra coils were expanding and burning, and they were doing their best to hold their ground. This is the first time they've felt this way. It felt like their DNA was being rearranged and years of instruction and knowledge were being forced into their brains. They also noticed that they were experiencing strong emotions, such as anger, hate, bitterness, or hurt. Regret? Those final two were definitely not from the obliterated Black Zetsu or the sacrificed Madara, so who? As the final chakra was sealed, a massive burst of power erupted between Naruto and Sasuke. They were hurled in different directions. Sasuke crashed into a wall but immediately adhered to it with the little chakra he had left, while Naruto landed roughly on a handy platform of rock. Suddenly, the numerous dimensional holes started to vanish and reappear in sporadic locations all around them. They were more concerned about the rapidly deteriorating volcanic world, but it was happening quickly and was difficult to follow. They desperately searched for a way home after realizing they were running out of time. A hole that overlooked the battlefield they had previously been on appeared beside Sasuke, seemingly as a blessing from Kami. Sasuke cried out, "Guys, over here." The Naruto clone moved quickly, using his remaining chakra to toss Sakura, Obito, and Kakashi in the direction of their return ticket to the elemental nations before vanishing. Even though Sakura screamed in shock, the throw was perfect, and they swiftly vanished through the hole, barely missing other dimensions that appeared out of thin air. Sasuke was about to follow, albeit very slowly because he was so tired, when he noticed Naruto straining to get out of his spot, staring at Sasuke with half-lidded eyes, blood-filled tears, and eyes that were changing quickly from blue to red to a grayish purple. But wait a what? Shit. Naruto, cried Sasuke. Get your ass moving, Dobi, or I swear to Kami I'll destroy all ramen. Naruto shakily got up on all fours with raspy breaths in what appeared to be a slight reaction to that. With his hearing beginning to fade and his vision becoming blurry, he muttered to himself, "Got-t-tog, get up." Then, suddenly, a new dimensional hole appeared directly below him. As if in slow motion, Saki's and his eyes grew wide as Naruto sank into the hole. Before darkness overtook his vision and he heard, "Naruto," in a far-off echo, all he could do was shakily extend his hands towards Sasuke. Then he began to fallinga. Ga! Naruto awoke abruptly and startled. He was sitting up, drenched in cold sweat, and breathing quickly. Holding his face gently in the palms of his hands, he shakily whispered, "Oh yeah. That's what happened." He noticed that the circle that had been used to mark him was no longer there. He thought for a moment, it must have served its purpose. Then a hand softly took hold of his frayed sleeve, causing him to startle a little. He looked into Katara's anxious blue eyes. With innocent innocence, she inquired, "Did you have a nightmare?" Naruto merely nodded slightly before turning to face her family members who were standing a few feet behind her. They appeared to be getting ready to eat a stew that smelled quite good. In the center of the now cleared and open room, they surrounded a small fire pit with a wooden cooking rig supporting a small metal pot that hung slightly over the flames. With a ladle and bowls in hand, Kya gave him a slightly worried look. Hakoda was merely curious and a little nervous to have him finally respond to his questions. And Sokka, well, was staring at the stew that was cooking with sparkling eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets of life. With a small, comforting smile, Katara said, Well, it's okay now. You don't have to be scared. Naruto couldn't resist allowing a grin to appear on his scruffy face. He said softly, I know. Thank you. Katara nodded and smiled broadly before heading back to her family. After a brief period of silence, Hakoda said, without asking a question, you understand we have a lot to talk about. With a nod, Naruto began to rise. With a challenging expression in his azure eyes, Naruto asked, do you mind if I take a walk first? There's a lot on mind. Hakoda's eyes narrowed a little, and how do I know you just won't leave or cause trouble? Naruto approached Katara, knelt down, and reached into his shirt, saying, because I wouldn't know where to go and from what I saw so far, there is nothing but snow for miles. But just in case you don't believe me. Before Katara gasped at the exquisite necklace he produced, she was perplexed. The thinly cut, glossy green crystal hanging vertically on a black cord is undoubtedly the focal point. A tiny silver bead on either side of the crystal was the only additional component. He glanced at Hakoda and then turned back to Katara, grinning, saying, this is for collateral so that I come back. He didn't want to strain their perception of him and make things even more challenging, but it's not like anyone here could really stop him if he decided to leave or do whatever he wanted. Take good care of this for me. Okay. Someone very special gave it to me years ago, he said as he gently placed it around her neck. With a determined nod, Katara glanced down at the green crystal before turning back to Naruto. Naruto walked over to a nearby chair and put on his boots and other clothes. He glanced around after passing the tarped entrance a few seconds later. If the starry sky was any indication, he appeared to have slept all day. He put his hands in his haori's pockets and walked back the way he had come, finding that almost all the damage had been repaired and that, thanks to the lights from their fires, almost everyone was inside their tents and igloos. As he went, he observed that people with their tents open and even some who had left their ice homes were giving him odd looks. The only thing he could do in response to their whispering was to continue walking. Nonetheless, he learned a few terms like healer, spirits, powerful, magic, and cute. With a hint of pink on his cheeks, he continued on his journey despite almost tripping when he heard the final one, which seemed to come from a couple of teenage girls. Apart from that, it appears that he was the subject of some rumors. Eventually, he returned to the same opening in the wall that he had previously entered. He ascended the hill he had fallen down, but not before rolling his eyes at his face's imprint in the snow that, for some reason, remained. His mind was still largely blank as he ascended, but when he reached the summit, his breath caught in his throat. Beautiful. He murmured in admiration. Far away, a stunning show of aurora lights was illuminating the frozen valley with its presence in the limitless sky. The mountains and unspoiled blankets of snow were made even more beautiful by the wavy streams of blues and greens. Its distant reflection on a tiny frozen lake gleamed with tranquility and serenity. Naruto's sparkling eyes almost brimmed with tears. It was like heaven on earth. He took a comfortable seat to observe this marvel of nature and collect his thoughts. Well, what now? He sighed and thought, it seems like I'm stuck here and it's not like I can just create dimensions like Kaguya. At least everyone is doing okay. He felt the tears come out and wiped them away with a quick sniff. I was ready to die for everyone, and in a strange way I guess I did. Sasuke, Sakura, Chan, Kakashi, Sensei, Ba, Chan, Shizune. Chan, Ino, Choji, Shikamaru, Kiba, Shino, Tenten, Lee, Uruka, Sensei, Ayame, Chan, Tucci, Gigi. I just hope they are happy going forward, he muttered. Hinata. Chan. I was really hoping to act on her confession after the war. Damn it, he exclaimed as his fingernails dug into his palms, almost drawing blood. He then exhaled shakily and unintentionally let a tear fall from his cheek into the snow beneath him. He glanced at his open right palm, still processing the heaviness of the feelings he was experiencing. And now I supposedly have the Rinnegan? He asked, sending chakra to his eyes and experiencing an odd sensation. He felt that tiny vibration in the air again, and everything around him appeared clearer. He slowly lifted his gloved hand to examine his reflection on the shiny handguard, symbolizing his suspicions. Oh Kami. He noticed that his eyes were a metallic purple color with 3 ripples around the pupil, exactly as he had imagined. He just sat there, gasping in disbelief, until he unconsciously sent chakra to his eyes once more in a, let's say, different manner. He blinked and noticed something entirely different covering his eyes, as if his life couldn't get any more nerve-wracking. There was no denying that the previous purple had been replaced by a crimson red, with a black pupil encircled by 3 connected tomos, each of which had an empty circle filled by the previously mentioned red, and 3 black bars that connected to an outer black ring. Madara's eternal Mangekyo Sharingan was in Naruto's possession. As if in sync with his slothful comrade, he uttered an irritated, "Troublesome." The battlefield was in disarray. Every few feet between each army's camp was a lifeless body. The defensive walls and other forts were destroyed. Despite suffering significant losses on both sides, the fighting continued. Every soldier who was still serving appeared to be utterly brutal and willing to make the ultimate sacrifice in order to win. One of the commanders watched with pride for his surviving soldiers and sorrow for the dead. As he watched, the commander thought, "Damn good troops. Every last one of them. This day was the reason we trained for everything." Abruptly, he heard movement to his left. It was already too late when he turned to look. Already headed for his chest, the weapon of choice for both sides struck with enough force to be heard throughout the entire skirmish. Just before the commander fell on his back, soldiers from both sides turned to watch him, some in triumph, some in shock. They all heard the distressed field medic yelling, "No," as she rushed to her fallen leader. When she was close enough, she slid down on her knees beside him and gave him a quick glance before grabbing her tiny medical pouch. Only to discover that all of her supplies had been consumed. Her expression abruptly changed from one of shock to one of defeat. A hand cupped her cheek tenderly before she could moan in her grief. She recognized it as coming from her wounded superior. He uttered a few coughs to demonstrate his deteriorating condition and said, "Don't look so down," in a shaky whisper. "As long as there is one to carry on our will, we haven't lost. There will always be hope for a future victory, even as we move on to the next life." As he watched her nod slightly and without emotion, he concluded, "Remember everything I taught you and never lose that bright fire fueling your spirit. I know you'll make me proud." Then his hand slowly slipped from her fragile face and dropped, motionless, to the merciless floor. As his head rolled to the side, officially out of action, the only thing that anyone else saw him do was release a final breath. Quietness. All the people inside the combat zone could hear was that. Was it to honor those who were unable to attend? Or perhaps it was simply the shock of seeing the great commander die? Nobody knew for sure. All they knew was that future generations would commemorate these courageous people's efforts on this day. "Ha! We finally won, in your stupid faces, woohoo! Soldiers." There were more exclamations of delight and just as many moans of frustration. All of this was attributed to both the dead and living troops. "Katara. Why didn't you revive Naruto? We could have kept going." Sokka whimpered as he let go of the snowball he had been reaching for. The now identified field medic, Katara, gave her brother a scowl. "Don't blame me. I wasted my last revival cookie on you. Maybe if you didn't keep on getting hit all the time, I could have used it on him instead." Sokka shot back, "I do not get hit all the time. My strategies are foolproof and when I do get hit, it's only because they got lucky." Strategies? Who in their right mind yells, "Sneak attack," before attacking? Sokka looked at a ruined wall of snow that served as their last line of defense, and he raised his as though he was going to respond, but he crossed his arms huffily and muttered, "Whatever. How did they get past our left flank anyway? And where is Yakwon?" Everyone turned to watch the unguarded wall as Yakwon, a young child, sheepishly returned to the conflict area. Everyone stared at him blankly, waiting for an explanation. He gave a bewildered look in return. His words were straightforward. "What? I had to pee." Sokka looked at his deceased leader and merely slapped his mittened hand across his forehead. "Why do you always have to be so dramatic, Naruto? You don't have to give speeches like that every time you get out." With pieces of snow falling off his chest and a fake look of rage on his face, the now exposed commander Naruto sat up quickly. "Hey, I only do that to make this as realistic as possible. I'm preparing you for real combat through this battle simulation." This battle simulation, as he liked to refer to it, was a small open space safely encircled by the homes of the tribe, and it was essentially a glorified snowball fight with a few extra rules. Every side had a commander they had to protect at all costs, and if he was struck by a snowball and not saved, his team would automatically lose. Additionally, each side has 5 revival cookies to bring someone back into the battle and designate someone as a field medic. But if they are not revived within 10 seconds of their death, they will be gone forever. All of the kids argued that cookies were more effective or that they were just looking for a way to get more treats, but whatever works. Doesn't Naruto's suggestion that the medics simply have 5 chances to say, "You're revived," with a gentle pat on the arm? "Or you're just making up for a failed acting career or something," muttered a random child. Naruto pouted as everyone laughed and giggled a little. More laughter broke out as a result, prompting other tribesmen and parents in the area to join in. The women laughed, finding the whole thing adorable, while the men shook their heads with amused smiles. Naruto laughed as he got back up on his feet. "Okay, you little warriors, front and center," Naruto commanded as the kids gathered around him. Now, Naruto said, pacing back and forth with his hands behind his back. Let's see if you remember some of my teachings. He halted his pacing and looked at him calculatingly. Who do we leave behind? He screamed, sounding like a paramedic. No one. They all shouted at once. Why do train our minds just as much as our bodies? Sometimes it's better to have brain over brawn. Why do we fight? To protect our precious people. Naruto gave a wise nod. Good. He clapped his hands together, saying, You've been listening well. Okay. We're done for today. See you tomorrow. Everyone said goodbye, with the exception of Katara and Sokka, and headed home. Before they could leave on their own, Katara pulled on Naruto's pant leg and looked at him expectantly. He laughed. He picked her up and put her on his shoulders after saying, Oh, all right. She laughed excitedly, then played absently with his blonde spikes. They were greeted with smiles and waves on their way to their individual homes, which they promptly returned. They eventually arrived at their igloo and entered. Kya and Kana were preparing lunch, also referred to as. Katara exclaimed, Hi Gran, from Naruto's shoulders. Hello children. Did you have fun playing with Naruto? Kana asked, glancing back and holding up her own smile and similar hairstyle. Before Naruto put Katara down, who was a little let down by the scene, both kids nodded. Then he gave Kana a frustrated, defeated expression. He whimpered fakely, We weren't playing, Kana. This is a carefully planned and effective warrior training program. Kana looked at him deadpan and wrinkled. That requires us to keep making you kids cookies? Your point? Was his blank reply. She returned to assisting with the food preparation after shaking her head. And how many times do I have to tell you? Call me Gran. Naruto merely laughed sheepishly. Sorry, I'm just not used to that yet. Kya turned to look behind her. She concluded with a warm smile that everyone noticed instantly spreading across their own faces. Really? You've definitely been here long enough. You've hunted with the men, repaired people's homes, helped with everyone's training, and you even look the part. You're practically family now. Then, thanks to Kya, Naruto noticed that his clothes had changed to something a little more suitable for the water tribe. Less important were the standard tribal boots and dark blue pants that matched the rest of the tribe, with the exception of the homemade belt buckle that replaced the forehead protector on his stored flak jacket. Like everyone else, he wore a blue coat with white fur where it belonged. But instead of being the typical knee to almost ankle length, his was about mid-thigh length. On the center of his chest was the water tribe's emblem, which was a crescent moon with 3 waves. Even more generously, Kya sewed the Konoha symbol on his left shoulder and an Uzumaki swirl on his right. Both were white, just like the water tribe's emblem. Since the symbols were on the same arm, he continued to wear them with his hand-guarded fingerless gloves. Beneath the coat is a long, sleeved black shirt that can be worn alone in warmer weather or as an undershirt in colder climates. The typical blue tunic that people wear was replaced by this. Naturally, the green crystal of the Shodai and his Ba-chan was tucked inside around his neck. What appeared to be a very loose turtleneck fastened to the shirt turned out to be a face mask similar to Kakashi's. Somewhat more flair is on Naruto's, though. The top and bottom rows of white canine-like teeth were visible when fully drawn up close to the top of his nose. When the fox's mouth was slightly open, it resembled Kurama's. Actually, it was quite frightening and scared the living daylights out of Katara and Sokka. Even Hikota gave a little start. Despite Kya's reluctance, Naruto persisted and even offered a sketched design. Learning to create beautiful seals and symbols and becoming a competent artist are 2 advantages of practicing Fuinjutsu. Sigh, eat your heart out. Speaking of Kurama, too. Since entering this dimension, Naruto has been unable to get in touch with the fox or any other Biju. He has also been unable to get in touch with Kaguya because, technically, he sealed her inside of himself. Is he also her Jinchuriki? Additionally, he still possessed Kurama's chakra, so should he be concerned? Oh no, he shouldn't give this too much thought because he is confident that something will happen and provide him with answers eventually. Naruto has undoubtedly been busy in the 2 years since his sudden arrival to the Southern Water Tribe. He has been practicing his new skills with his dojutsu and has become almost proficient in them, but that does not mean he has allowed his other abilities to deteriorate. Since he was already on par with Ero Sennin, if not better, he occasionally practiced his Fuinjutsu. However, one of his newly acquired Rinnegan skills readily addressed the question, but what happened when he ran out of supplies? How was he able to practice his calligraphy without special ink or sealing paper? A month following arrival, a man, cradled tightly in a sleeping bag, was quite distressed. All that was visible was his sweat-drenched face and blonde hair. A close examination would reveal that his teeth were clenched and his body was trembling all the time. What could be the cause of this? What tragedies led to this young man's loss of well-being and sanity? Naruto shivered and uttered, N.N.No more R. Ramen left. Indeed, ramen withdrawal was the cause of his terrible condition. It's not the most manly way to become ill, but we all have flaws. He ran out of all of his instant ramen cups a little more than 2 weeks ago as a result of some emotional eating brought on by homesickness. His enormous supply from his storage scrolls and even emergency stash from the invisible seals on his arms was ultimately depleted. Now a shadow of his former self, Naruto appeared to have given up on humanity. Kami could still picture the lovely Ayame serving him a large bowl of Ichiraku's miso ramen. It would be steaming and smell divine, and the broth would be perfectly balanced to give his taste buds total euphoria. In fact, he could even recall the precise weight and texture of the bowl and its contents. If only. Thunk, with weary eyes fixed on the ground before him, he uttered a soft, W. What? A white, hazy object started to emerge. N.No way, he muttered, holding back a cry. There was a steaming bowl of Ichiraku's miso ramen in front of him, complete with chopsticks. He didn't know how long he stared, his eyes moistening and his mouth wide, but when it finally dawned on him that it wasn't a hallucination, he let out a cry of pure joy for the first time in a long time. In the background, his peculiar skills and ungainly demeanor completely alarmed Hakoda's family. It took some time to discern that his ability to produce the food of the gods merely from memory was a result of his yin-yang release. He was thrilled to hear this and attempted to make other items, such as kunai, but discovered that perfecting them required a great deal of mental skill. This was true of everything he attempted to make, but time and a few hundred shadow clones couldn't help. He could now attempt to create a variety of things, such as money. Every time that thought occurred to him, he felt a wicked chuckle of triumph start to grow. Although the water tribe's money wasn't worth much because it wasn't used much outside the tribe and everyone lived off of hunting and gathering their own food, not much trading took place. Next up are his taijutsu and kenjutsu, among other skills. Sparring with seasoned fighters like Hakoda and even his friend Bado took care of his taijutsu. He defeated them with ease thanks to his style of swift feints and strong, rapid strikes. When he offered to help them become better fighters, the hurt to their and others' egos subsided. But he did make their lives extremely difficult. They were exhausted from rigorous strength and speed training, and they all collapsed back into their families. Naruto also discovered that, regrettably, it is never pleasant to witness an adult man cry. But after a year of training, it undoubtedly made the tribe a formidable opponent in direct combat, and it would only get better. He also developed his kenjutsu skills by engaging in combat with the different warriors that were available, though it is clear that they used weapons like spears and battle clubs. With his 2-foot long ninjutsu blade, Naruto was able to move quickly and reach a good distance. It had a completely black handle that was comfortable to hold with 2 hands. He was always reminded of his mother's hair by the round design of the handguard, which was a crimson Uzumaki swirl. The blade was made of gunmetal with a shiny silver edge. All of this was contained in a black scabbard with an orange Uzumaki swirl and a white Konoha symbol on it. After much brutal kenjutsu training, Yugo gave him the go-ahead, and Jiraiya gave him this exquisite and chakra-conducted weapon. She initially refused Naruto's request for her teachings, but she eventually gave in when he offered herself repairing and strengthening seals for her sword, which he then used on his own weapons. After much suffering and time, Naruto eventually gained respect as a swordsman, but he was never able to defeat Yugo. Kami, that woman, was a formidable opponent. His kenjutsu, like his taijutsu, depended on speed and allowed him to either swiftly end it with a deadly stab while under an opponent's guard or gradually weaken them with a variety of slashes. Naturally, his elemental training made his ninjutsu exceptional. He got to work right away when Jiraiya said that although a shinobi might only have one primary elemental affinity, they can practice with the others until they become natural as well. By the end of the 3-year journey, he had a good command of all the other abilities and had almost perfected his affinity for wind. Upon learning of this, Kakashi felt compelled to provide Naruto with some guidance and even scrolls that contained fundamental knowledge about some of the numerous jutsu techniques he had acquired over the years with the help of his Sharingan. He gained a lot of knowledge, but now that his Rinnegan had given him the ability to automatically acquire all affinities, including gravity, he could practice any jutsu. Shizune gave him a medical ninjutsu to try, and he was even able to use it. She would be very proud, as would Sakura and Ba-chan. Naturally, he always practiced these jutsu far from the tribe because he didn't want to unintentionally blow everyone up. The Kage Bunshin, Hiraishin, Shunshin, and Rasengan were actually the only jutsu that anyone ever witnessed him performing in public after the kids pleaded with him to demonstrate his magical abilities. The expressions on each of their faces were priceless. After a few demonstrations, he even gained some notoriety. Fortunately, that fame subsided after a few weeks, and he was just a special member of the tribe that brightened the mood. He wouldn't know how to survive if a group of fangirls followed him around. The majority of people asked him how he does these things, and he replied that he uses energy called chakra, which is comparable to the kai that benders use. He is aware of what benders are, but that will come later. They naturally wanted to know what chakra was, but he only explained that it was a term his people from his background used. He responded to their curiosity by saying that everyone would eventually learn the answer. Several months had passed since his initial arrival. His Sharingan solved his genjutsu problems with ease. With the Rinnegan's flawless chakra control and the Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan's genjutsu abilities, all he needed to do was look into someone's eyes to see anything his mind could conjure up. He used a clone because, of course, no tribal member was used to test this. It wasn't the most enjoyable experience, despite the fact that his abilities were effective. It seems that he can have a sick mind. Damn memory feedback. Even though he was making incredible progress with the skills he already knew, he kind of hit a brick wall when he realized something. He was essentially illiterate in this world and had no idea what the world outside the South Pole was like. It's strange that even though they speak the same language, they seem to have completely different reading and writing styles. It's really strange, but he chose not to ask. Unfortunately, this meant he would have to do something he would never want to do again. He needed to return to school. He shuddered at the word itself. Hasn't he endured enough suffering? Why does he have to endure so many pointless lectures? Actually, it wasn't that bad. Shortly after his yin-yang release was discovered, he enrolled in classes. They were held in a sizable tent that appeared to be able to comfortably accommodate 30 people. The first day he went was a little awkward because there were a lot of children there, but in a way, they were all on the same level. Within a month of arrival, reluctantly, Naruto pushed the tent flap aside and climbed inside. When he noticed that Katara and Sokka were enrolled in the same classes, he was able to find some comfort. They essentially put him on a pedestal and introduced him as soon as they saw him. Within the first minute, he was the cool kid, something he had not been able to do during his years at the academy. His ego grew a little, even if it was only children. That was the situation up until. "Ah, look at Mr. Popular. You're going to have a wonderful time with us, aren't you?" was delivered in a baby voice while a hand was gripping his cheek tightly. Naruto noticed that the teacher, who appeared to be in her 30s, was the source of it. She was named Yuzuki, and it seemed that she was the best they had. She was making the most of the opportunity to tease a grown man who was going to school with kids. When he heard the kids laughing, he blushed a little, but he quickly bounced back, thinking of a way to retaliate with his own taunting. He pressed himself against her ear. He muttered, "I know I'll have a good time as long as you're here." It seems that not all of Jiraiya's lessons were in vain. Her face lit up, but when she saw him begin to laugh, she calmed down and became a little irritated. Yes, this was going to be an interesting class. During the following few months of his crash courses, the teasing persisted, but it was all in good humor. He only needed to pick up their reading and writing skills, absorb some history, and gain a general understanding of how the world functions. The history of the Avatar, the master of all four elements, truly piqued his interest. The mention of this world's seeming version of a once-in a lifetime sage brought to mind his chat with Hakoda just days after the Fire Nation raid. "Firebenders?" inquired Naruto. Hakoda gave a nod. "They have the ability to create and control fire." "Does everyone have the potential to become firebenders?" "No, there are those that have the gift of bending and those who don't. It depends on genetics." Naruto gave a sympathetic nod. "Are they the only type of benders?" Hakoda gave a negative shake of his head. "There are benders of the four elements: earth, water, fire, and air. Well, not air anymore." "Why?" He stated plainly, they were all wiped out by the Fire Nation. Then, Naruto discovered the tale of the air nomads' annihilation as well as the war that had been going on for almost a century. Because the Uzumaki were all but exterminated, he could sympathize with them. Hakoda continued by briefly describing the Avatar and the fact that he was the only person in the world with the ability to bend multiple elements. Finding out that a new Avatar is born into the subsequent element of the cycle after the previous one dies was intriguing. However, it appeared that the ancient cycle had come to an end with the departure of the air nomads, leaving the world in a state of war. He was shocked to learn that Katara was the final waterbender in the South Pole and that Kya had lied and given her life to save her daughter during the raid he saw. Naruto was clearly furious and vowed to hold those responsible accountable, but at the time, that had to wait. In any case, Naruto's studies during his 2-month period went off without a hitch. Shadow clones are fantastic. After finishing, He gave Yuzuki a hug and a cheek kiss before sprinting out of the tent in a triumphant graduation. As she said goodbye to him, she froze and turned as red as a tomato. All he needed to do was give one final hint, and now here we are. Naruto smiled gratefully as he looked back up from his garments. Yeah, family. Noon on the following day. When Naruto went in search of Hakoda, he had just returned from training outside the village. According to his recollection, he and the other warriors ought to be sparring in the same spot where the children engaged in yesterday's snowball fight. It took a few minutes to arrive, and he did see Hakoda taking a break with the other men. Naruto shouted, "Oi, Hakoda," as soon as he was close enough. Hakoda noticed Naruto waving at him when he looked up. He walked up to him, looking at him curiously. "Need something?" Naruto gave a headshake. He grinned and said, "I think it's about time I let everyone know." Hakoda's eyes grew slightly wider. "Are you sure?" Naruto sneered. "It's been 2 years already. All you guys have treated me as one of your own since the beginning, and families shouldn't keep secrets from each other." His expression was solemn. Hakoda couldn't resist grinning proudly. "Well, do what you feel is right and I'll back you up. Are you going to show them using that weird eye thing like you did me?" Naruto laughed and nodded. "Yes, the Tsukuyomi. You see, Naruto had to speak with Hakoda face after he woke up and returned from his observation of the aurora lights. Hakoda essentially interrogated Naruto with quick, difficult follow questions while they waited until everyone had fallen asleep. Although he didn't particularly want to go through this process, he wanted the trust of both the village and the leader. It would take Naruto a long time or make him appear insane to explain everything, such as the Rinne Tensei or his origins. He decided to simply demonstrate his recently acquired Mangekyo Sharingan to him. He reasoned that since he had complete control over his own domain, he could project his memories, even though the Tsukuyomi was primarily used for psychologically traumatic genjutsu. It was almost too effective. Naruto made the decision to show Hakoda the key aspects of his life in order for him to fully comprehend the meaning of his character. He was shocked by the red eyes at first, but he soon calmed down because he had already experienced the shock of seeing the Rinnegan. It was such a surreal experience. When he first met Naruto, he was in a strangely colored world where everything was constantly shifting to fit the right memory. Hakoda witnessed everything. The mistreatment, neglect, and other forms of negativity were terrible. How could he be smiling and still be sane? After that, there was Konoha, his pals, the academy, shinobi, chakra, Chunin exams, the elemental nations, Biju, Akatsuki, violent conflicts, war, Kaguya, dimensional travel, and more. Hakoda was hardly able to take in what he was seeing. In essence, Naruto was a formidable warrior from a different planet who could rival the legendary avatars. He immediately collapsed to his knees, dry heaving, as he tried to contain his stomach contents after being freed from the genjutsu. Who was to blame? He witnessed many horrific deaths and was essentially fucked. The fact that there were only a few seconds in the real world shocked him even more. By the time he recovered, he realized that Naruto would allow him to remain and would not harm the tribe. He was a decent man who was in dire need of rest and a chance to get his bearings in a brand new world. He essentially lost everyone and everything he held dear. Since everyone trusted the chief's judgment and only Hakoda was aware of Naruto's life up to this point, they refrained from interrogating him. Hakoda replied, "Oh yeah, that's what it was called." Hakoda expressed concern, saying, "Wait, are you showing the kids and elderly too? They shouldn't see all that." "I know, that's why it's going to be a very censored down version. I showed you everything because you as the leader needed to fully understand where I, a suspicious stranger, came from." Hakoda understood and nodded. "Should I get everyone together right now?" "Yes. They should know by now." Open space by the shore, half an hour later. Naruto, who was standing on a piece of ice about 15 feet tall that he had gotten on with the help of the Shunshin, looked down at the entire tribe that had gathered around, whispering to one another. He projected his voice like the Sandame at the Chunin exams using chakra, saying, "Please pay attention to me." Everyone fell silent and turned to stare at him. "I'm grateful. Right now, I'm going to address every query you've had about me over the previous few years. You just have to look into my eyes and have faith in me." They nodded to the blonde despite becoming a little perplexed. After a dramatic pause, Naruto opened his eyes after closing them. Everyone let out a gasp. These are unique eyes known as the Sharingan. You'll find out about them soon. Because of the children, I will now attempt to make this experience as easy as possible and somewhat family-friendly. You can ask Hakoda for more information, or the adults can get together at a later time for a complete version. Remember, keep your eyes on mine and we can start, he said, clearing his throat. When he noticed that they were all focused, he turned on the Tsukuyomi. A later censored session of Tsukuyomi. After they were able to gather their thoughts, the crowd was bustling with activity, with some people in shock, others crying, and still others with amazed awe in their eyes. Everything returned to the real world with a hazy dizziness. An alternate reality? Is that the definition of chakra? Why was the orange jumpsuit there? Jutsu. Beasts with tails. That's how he was treated. How has it not gone insane? His world was saved. All I want to do is hug the poor guy. Some villagers, particularly the women, appeared to have reached some sort of consensus after that last remark. But first, before they were going to comfort our favorite blonde Crunch, they all turned to see Naruto fall face first into the somewhat deep snow after falling off his ice platform, unmoving. He didn't really consider that. It seems like it's okay to bring one person into Tsukuyomi, but a whole tribe might be a little exhausting. Someone at random said, I think we should help him. Everyone nodded stupidly. The morning after. Kami, I'm stupid, he muttered as his blue eyes groggily opened to the ceiling he had grown accustomed to. A weary feminine voice said, well, that's not a very nice thing to say about yourself. Naruto turned to see Hakoda, Kana, and Kya seated close to him, eating breakfast. Kya wasn't particularly interested because her food appeared cold and she appeared to have been crying. Kya, are you alright? Just above a whisper, Naruto inquired. I just don't understand how someone can experience all of that and turn out like you did, she said, blowing out a tear as she glanced at him and sniffed. Especially as a child. Because of something over which you had no control. Then they abruptly change and treat you well as if nothing had happened after you saved their asses? Everyone's jaw dropped. Kya never swore. Was the end of the world? Naruto found his voice and said, it's just that sometimes you have to let go of your hatred and be the bigger person. Even though it was really difficult, I was able to come to terms with both myself and them. All they were scared of was an incomprehensible thing. The blonde shinobi was undoubtedly unique, and they all stared at him in wonder. How can someone move on from something like that? So that's how you brought me back, Kya said, shaking her head and choosing to shift the topic. I knew the response of a special medical technique wasn't entirely accurate. She gave him a playful, accusing look, but it was strained and her eyes were puffy. Yes, Naruto chuckled sheepishly. Well, at least I didn't claim that it was because I'm so awesome. So that Tsunade woman was the special person that gave you that necklace? She asked, nodding and laughing. She was the first person I ever considered to be a mother to me, despite her bad habits. He nodded back, grinning and laughing like a child. First? Kya inquired. Naruto merely gazed at her, his smile softening. Her eyes began to sparkle and a broad smile spread across her lovely face, suggesting that she had understood the message. Grinning, Hakoda put an arm around her before turning to face Naruto. He pushed his head against his blanket covered body and said, you know, she wasn't the only one to worry about you. Looking down, Naruto saw Katara's face resting on his chest, teary-eyed and sleeping. Sokka, who appeared to have used his body as a pillow, was lying close to his legs, snoring and letting his face fall to the ground. Instead, Naruto sat up, holding Katara to his body, fighting the urge to laugh. The 10-year-old muttered unintelligible words and instinctively tucked himself closer to his chest. Naruto glanced at the other adults and inquired, how did they take it? This time it was Kana who spoke. Katara cried, saying she didn't like it when you got hurt or how people treated you. Although she managed to settle down when she remembered how you beat up the bad guys like a superhero. Kana laughed. Everyone chuckled when Sokka said, that's when Sokka got really excited and started jumping around. As Naruto rocked Katara slowly back and forth, there was a brief pause before he turned to face Hakoda. He smirked and remarked, I think it's about time we commence Operation Clipped Wing. A little surprised, Hakoda refocused. Really? That plan seems really dangerous and risky for any of us. His smirk persisted as he said, not for a shinobi. Hakoda appeared to have recognized this and let his own grin show. Oh yeah, how could I have forgotten that? He said with a small, menacing laugh that made Kya and Kana nervous. Give them hell, kid. The lady was not calmed by Naruto's appearance, which now resembled that of a very cunning fox poised to unleash total chaos. Whaletail Island's bastards won't even anticipate it. The tribe that had assembled experienced a wide range of emotions due to the impending event. They were a little relieved, nervous, and excited. Why? The blonde who has left his mark on each of their lives was about to set out on a perilous quest. The knowledge that the Southern Water Tribe was at last able to take the battle to the Fire Nation was the source of the excitement. He was fighting for the tribe, even though it was through a non-original member. Their innate protective instinct for one of their own caused anxiety. But when they recalled the type of person their courageous warrior was, the relief swiftly overcame nearly all of their concerns. He was a man whose strength and determination could only be imagined in the most fantastical of circumstances. If any mortal were unlucky enough to get in his way, they would shudder with fear and amazement. A god among men, he was. Someone who has the ability to alter the course of history. Someone who. I already told you I have everything I need, Kya. Dot had a whining voice. Huh? As Kya watched Naruto seal his supplies away on his person, she yelled, "Don't you raise your voice to me, you lunatic. I have a right to be worried for what you're about to do. You're so lucky we already know what you're capable of." As he sealed some jerky to the tiny food seal on his arm, Naruto muttered to himself. It glowed and was barely noticeable before vanishing. What was that? Nothing, was Naruto's swift, terrified reply. As she spoke again, she shot him a victorious glance. She then appeared a little concerned and said, "You better believe it was nothing. Are you sure you're going to be okay by yourself? What if you get hurt or even lost?" Naruto got to his feet, put his hands on her shoulders, and smiled reassuringly. "I'll be fine. I heal fast and Hakoda taught me everything about navigating on the ocean. I also have my shinobi abilities, remember?" She gave him a blank stare. "You mean like the one that knocked you out into the snow a few days ago?" Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly. "I don't think that one will be required on this trip, and if I do it's definitely going to be under safe circumstances, I swear." After a moment of not believing him, she sighed and embraced him tightly, to which he promptly returned the embrace and rested his chin on top of her head. She whispered into his shoulder, "Just come back alive, okay?" He hugged her more tightly. His body stiffened in the hug, and he groaned. "Don't worry. I'll get back as soon as I can, Datbeo. Damn it." After giggling, Kya took a step back and kissed his whiskered cheek. She grinned sadly and gave a playful order, "You better. Are you going to take off or are you going to start making out with my wife?" Naruto leapt and turned to face Hakoda, who was glaring at him, but Naruto knew he wasn't serious. He composed himself and shrugged calmly. "Not my fault, Kya can't keep her hands off of me." Kya grabbed Hakoda's cheek roughly before he could respond. "Oh, really? Why do you think that na.ru.to?" she asked sweetly, applying more pressure with each sound of his name. Naruto begged, all right, I get your point," and then rubbed his aching face after she released his hold. After rolling his eyes, Hakoda became serious. He said, "You good to go?" Naruto returned the nod. "I just got to say goodbye to the kids." Hakoda grinned. "Go ahead." Then Naruto approached the front of the crowd, where Sokka and Katara were among the kids. "All right, little warriors. I won't be able to train you for 1 or 2 weeks, so keep up what I've had you working on, okay?" Every boy and girl gave a nod. Yes, both girls and boys. After his recollections of all the incredible kunoichi were revealed, it turns out that the conventional system of only having male warriors was disrupted. Even the parents were in favor of it. They showed a lot of heart, but they hardly got started. Katara undoubtedly enjoyed the change of pace and put in even more effort to improve her bending skills. A boy raised his voice. "Are you going to tell us what you're doing?" Only the adults were told, and they only know a little. As though requesting permission, Naruto glanced around. Every face in the crowd nodded and smiled trustingly. After giving it some thought, Naruto said with a slight smile, "I'm going to a Fire Nation outpost the warriors know about to try and find the people that attacked you guys a couple years ago. Then I'm going to beat them up, as simple as that." They all said, "Ooh," and then muttered to one another. Naruto looked up to all the other members of the tribe and saw how they instantly became serious. Beat up was a pejorative term, as they all knew. They nodded back at him. Sokka extended his fist as Katara and Sokka approached him. Smiling, he said, "Kick their butts good, okay?" Naruto struck it with his own fist. "You know I will." Katara then stood directly in front of Naruto, who knelt down to meet her face. Ignoring Sokka's protesting, "Hey." In the background, he softly said, "Take care of all the little warriors and Sokka for me, alright? You're the responsible one, remember?" After giving him a small nod, Katara practically jumped on him and embraced him tightly, wrapping her arms around his neck. He gripped her just as firmly before releasing his hold and kissing her forehead, causing her to blush. Both adults and children chortled, "Ew, ah." It wasn't difficult to determine who said what. Then a teenage girl raised her voice. While their fathers glared at the blonde out of habit, the other girls gave playful smirks and asked, "What about the rest of us lover.boy?" After a brief period of silence, Naruto scoffed and got to his feet, crossing his arms and raising his nose. "At least I had dinner with Katara and her family already. I swear, You all need to keep your hormones in check," he exclaimed as he began to make his way back to Hakoda. However, before doing so, he said, mockingly angry and sad, "If you want a piece of this you got to do it right. I got feelings too, you know," before abruptly laughing. At first, everyone was confused, but then they all started laughing. The previous girl turned to Katara. "So when's the wedding?" As Katara slowly sank into her coat, her face practically steaming, the laughter intensified. Naruto wore the solemn expression he always had when he was going on a mission as he approached Hakoda and his ready-made cutter sailing ship. Between him and Whaletail Island, nothing remained. As Naruto climbed into the boat, Hakoda questioned, "You still know what you're going to do?" "Sneak into tower, gather information on the fleet's patrol pattern, chase if they are heading away or wait if they are close to anchoring near the outpost. Then I go have a nice little chat with all of the raiders, especially the leader," he said with a sarcastic grin as he set sail. With his eyes narrowing at the recollection, Hakoda asked, "Get a little extra payback for me?" Naruto looked back at him doubtfully after saying, "I plan on it. Does this look intimidating enough if I do this at night?" Naruto asked, lifting his face mask covered in teeth and covering his spiky blonde hair with his newly attached hood. After positioning both garments, he turned on his Rinnegan and gave Hakoda a mocking, irate glance. All the chief could do was nod stupidly and retreat a short distance. After laughing at the confirmation, Naruto deactivated his dojutsu and drew down the black garments. He held his arm down to Hakoda and said, "I guess I'm off then." With a nod, Hakoda and the shinobi clasped their forearms. There was nothing more to say. Everyone else approached the shore as Naruto continued to venture farther and farther into the frigid waters. Kya put her hands over her mouth in a cup. "Remember not to die. I still want surrogate grandchildren someday." Everyone chuckled a little before a distant, "What, Datbeo?" and an echoed, "Damn it," turned it into a full-fledged commotion. Whaletail Island. 1 week later, Naruto arrived at the outpost in his genjutsu-clad ship as the sun was sinking. If he docked it close to them, they probably wouldn't notice it anyhow, but you can never be too cautious. He secured the ship when he arrived at a small beach and then left a clone to keep it under the genjutsu, making sure he had placed a Hiraishin seal on it. After preparing everything, he leapt onto the sand, covering his most noticeable features with his hood and face mask. For this operation, he was dressed entirely in black. Through the dimensional hole were his repaired combat boots and cargo pants from his initial fall. His fingerless gloves and his typically long-sleeved undershirt were the only items covering his torso. The shoulders featured a Konoha symbol and a white Uzumaki swirl, just like his coat. Since he didn't want anything to be linked to the water tribe, he decided against having the emblem sewn on. He exhaled one last time, channeled his chakra toward his legs, and leapt high enough to stay close to the cliff's edge. He quickly reviewed the plan in his mind and used Jiraiya's transparency jutsu as he hung there. Even though it was applied improperly, the old pervert's mind truly produced a fantastic jutsu. He climbed over the top, his body invisible, and walked steadily to the tower. He didn't give a damn about the grunts who worked here. As he entered the main building through the open door, he thought, "Wow, this is really easy." His footsteps were muted as he moved through the halls and up the stairs, the only effort needed being to move aside to avoid being bumped by the guards. He eventually arrived at a room that appeared to contain all of the important documents that were delivered by Messenger Hawk, though if the absence of Hawks was any indication, all of the day's mail appeared to have already been sent. The room was empty except for a woman who was looking at a map of the Earth Kingdom. Naruto, with a slight internal conflict, walked calmly behind her. "Should I or shouldn't I?" He gave a mental shrug. "Fuck it, might as well." He removed his invisibility by carefully lowering his head to her ear. He whispered softly, "Sneak attack." Her eyes widened in alarm, but she was slashed across the back of the neck and rendered unconscious before she could make a sound. Before her face could strike the desk, Naruto grabbed her shoulders and folded her arms over it to support her head. "That's how you do it, Sokka." He chuckled to himself in a low voice. "Now let's see what we could find." He perused a number of files before discovering the Southern Raiders mission log. He observed that over the years, they had conducted a number of campaigns, most of which took place along the Earth Kingdom's shores. There were accounts of villages being destroyed, prisoners being captured, and both military and civilian lives being taken by their hands. It was all done for the Fire Nation's honor. Just wait, he thought resentfully. A few minutes later, he found a brief excerpt from the Water Tribe raid report. He squinted and said, "Raid successful. No casualties. Confirmed kill of last Southern Water Tribe waterbender by Commander Yan Ra. Well, at least I know who I'm trying to find." He discovered the fleet rotations a short while later and discovered that they would be arriving in a few hours. It turns out that Yan Ra was going to retire, gathered his belongings in the barracks of the outpost, and have his last farewell. He whispered, "Perfect." He gave the woman a little medical ninjutsu to put her to sleep, and then hurried out of the building to await the delivery of his prize. After a couple of hours, in order to secure their positions, 3 large metal ships with sea ravens on their red flags stopped close to the outpost and sank their anchors deep into the water below. Distinctively armored soldiers calmly and carelessly strolled out onto the decks of each individual ship, chatting with one another. The final person to join his soldiers was a man on the middle ship. He passed with his graying black hair and blank face, and the different men turned to mutter, "Commander," and nod respectfully. When he appeared to be about to issue an order, they all appeared to be staring at him, but that moment was cut short in his throat when a powerful aura was released into the atmosphere. Everyone tensed, unsure of how to respond to this novel feeling. Yan Ra was among those who anxiously scanned their surroundings for anything that might be the source of this. Suddenly, an emotionless voice said, "So this is the esteemed Commander Yan Ra." This put an end to their curiosity. They all turned to face the front of the ship, where a stranger dressed in black stood peacefully with his arms folded. They were only more nervous because of his hood and face mask. What on earth was his origin, was what many people were thinking. "What are you doing on this ship, and who are you?" Once he found his voice, Yan Ra yelled. "Simply put, that doesn't matter," he concluded as he began to move forward a few paces. "You won't be alive long enough to find out." They all seemed to be startled by this and went on the attack, with 2 men firing tiny fireballs at him at the same time, but he simply disappeared when they got close. The men who started the fire were only able to stare in bewilderment at the vacant area before experiencing a searing pain in their throats. The intruder materialized behind the 2 men in the blink of an eye, then thrust his hands forward with a sickening squelch, leaving everyone else to watch in disbelief. With the kunai now lodged through them, the 3 of them stood motionless until the man moved aside and allowed the other 2 to fall, clawing desperately at their throats until they could only gurgle a few times before going limp and allowing the blood to slowly trickle onto the metal surface that supported them. The other soldiers stood motionless, wondering how this man moved so quickly and whether they could really harm him. They were even more shocked when they saw him slowly turn around at that point. They all felt a chill run down their spines, a trickle of sweat trickling down their foreheads, and where his eyes had been hidden in the shadows, they were now 2 glowing orbs of violet staring down at them with the promise of pain. He marched forward once more, forcing everyone to attack in the hopes that their greater numbers would overwhelm him. While some moved in with their fists burning to deliver a punch, others fired from a distance. But their efforts were in vain, for he, gazing intently at all their attacks, easily avoided the fire and blows, and appeared to be playing with them, not even retaliating. He fought for almost a minute before deciding he had had enough. A Shunshin reappeared at the front of the deck, and he turned to face them all, raising his left hand before swiftly lowering it. Yan Ra, however, was simply held in place standing up as he was visibly shaking in a mixture of fear and resistance of the unknown force surrounding his body. The result was instantaneous as all of the southern raiders slammed into the ground, immobile as if a huge weight had been placed upon them, and their grunts of struggle were heard throughout the group. Yan Ra felt increasingly frightened as the distance between them dwindled. The pit of his stomach fell, cold sweat began to glaze over his wrinkled skin, and his eyes, which had once been full of pride and authority, were now cowering and on the verge of letting out tears of fear. The man strode forward once more, this time with nothing to stand in his way but the still bodies he had to step over. He prayed for some kind of assistance to come, but wait, what about the other ships? His heart twitched with hope as he swiftly glanced to the left and right, but all he saw crushed any hope of escaping this unscathed. All the other soldiers were pressed together at the port and starboard sides of the other ships to stare at him, and he saw that beside them was a man who resembled his assailant, his own arm raised toward the frozen soldiers, as if he was also in control of them. What? There are more of them, he muttered in shock. Don't you adore gravity control and cage buncheons? The aforementioned attacker, who was now only a few feet away from the commander, said nonchalantly, they're just so helpful sometimes. With ragged breaths and now sweaty bangs hanging messily over his face, Yan Ra snapped his head back towards him and said, Please don't do anything else. I give up. Take whatever you want. He was on the verge of crying uncontrollably. Money, these ships, my men as hostages, anything. Then, with crimson fluid oozing out, the man punched Yan Ra hard across the face, shattering his nose. You're a cowardly piece of shit, nothing more. You're all high and mighty until you're backed into a corner. He screamed, grabbing his chin roughly to make him look into his rippled eyes. You're sacrificing everything for your personal safety rather than dying with honor. Even your own men. Horrible. The defeated commander merely let out terrified whimpers of pain as he finished and released his grip. The now irate purple-eyed man took a step back and cleared his throat, saying, "With that said, let's get down to business." Suddenly, dozens of copies of the man appeared beside him. The original just nodded his head, and they hurried off in all directions, some jumping over the railing and others running into the ship's entrance, but there was no splash. "While we wait, I might as well deliver my letters," he said with a hint of joy. L. Letters? Is that the only reason you came here? Oh, there was that tiny bit of hope again. Sure. I will take them and forward them to whoever you desire. Why, I'm grateful. After all, you're not such a bad guy, he answered, ahem, from the Southern Water Tribe. As a piece of paper materialized in his right hand and he glanced down at it as though reading. Just before he saw the man flex his index finger, Yan Ra's face blanched. Crack. Odge. The leader of the Southern Raiders' arms snapped in several places as he screamed in bloody murder. Don't you think those were very kind words? Now then, from Chief Hakoda and his kids, he said, flipping the blank paper over and flexing his finger once more. Snap crunch, his legs were practically reduced to dust, and this time he didn't scream. Instead, he squeaked out a trembling breath and let the tears fall down his cheeks. I understand, am I correct? When I read it, I almost started crying. He wiped away a fake tear and began, now the last one, as the paper was carelessly thrown aside. Well, that's surprising, but it does come from a very nice woman by the name of Kya. Do you remember the name of the last Southern Water Tribe waterbender? I doubt you do. He remained stunned, his eyes rolling back, and he made no answer, but before he could mercifully faint, a glowing green hand touched his head. He pretended to be worried and said, "Can't have you nodding off on me now, you'll miss the surprise." It seems like that's my cue, he said, backing up and clapping his hands together as his head jerked slightly in realization as he removed his glowing hand from the commander. His eyes instantly became 1,000 times deadlier. You'll be getting Kya's message shortly, but before that I'd like to say one thing, he said excitedly. Avoid doing so. Fuck. With. My. Family. And as soon as he showed up, in a flash of yellow, he vanished. Open Cliff, Whaletail Island, Fire Nation Outpost. Then, thanks to the seal he put in place before he went water walking to the ships, he reappeared in the same way on the cliff beside the barracks. As he sat down and turned to face the anchored ships a few hundred yards away, he heard several gasps behind him, followed by a, "What the hell? Isn't it a pleasant evening? You guys have a great view," Naruto said without turning around. "What's it like at dusk, I wonder?" It appears that someone was drawn to the far off firebending, and everyone flocked to see it. One managed to collect himself. Raise your hands. You are being taken into custody. Then, forgetting their surprise at the intruder's teleportation, they all assumed combat positions. Don't really feel like doing that, but I'll meet you halfway if you want. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and hummed in thought, then raised his hands to his chest and joined them to form the snake seal. He turned around to see their shocked expressions when they saw his glowing, uninterested Rinnegan eyes. Would you all please do me a favor? I would be very grateful if you could communicate with the Fire Lord on my behalf. While maintaining their positions of caution, they were all interested in the meaning of this enigmatic man. In a strange way, it was a moment of bonding with a former adversary. He had no idea why he said what he was about to say, but it felt right and totally appropriate for this circumstance. He cleared his throat. Art is exploding. Then he sent chakra through the seal. Katsu. Before the unimaginable occurred, he yelled. The elite special forces of their navy were on display, and everyone watched as the ships of the Southern Raiders exploded in brilliant flames of red and orange before clouds of black rushed into the air, causing the surrounding area to tremble and a few people to lose their balance before staring in shock. We're totally destroyed. Oh well, they shouldn't have been carrying so much blasting jelly. I guess you just got to learn from your mistakes, Naruto said, shrugging and waving his hand before turning to face the shell. Shocked grunts. Yane. Then, just like before, he vanished after a single flash of yellow. The Patola Mountains open waters. Let's try this again. Naruto said softly to himself as he held his hand out in front of him, palm up, as he drifted along on his ship with a few clones keeping the sail and steering. He took a breath, persisted in his efforts, and even started to perspire. Come on, come on. Abruptly, there was another flicker, another. Before Naruto regained control and allowed it to subside, flames erupted in a roaring blast several feet into the air. He then gazed at the tiny flame hovering over his hand with fascination. Yada. Who says I have to firebend with Kai? He jumped and yelled out. After firing a few test balls of fire into the open, he sat back down on the little crate and sighed loudly, then laughed a little. I guess I was right, he said, glancing at his hand. I wonder if waterbending can use it. Bay of Chameleons? Naruto inquired. Yes, it is directly west of the capital of the Fire Nation but east of the Earth Kingdom. We will all be assigned to this location to protect the Eastern Sea as a whole. Troops from the Earth Kingdom are getting ready to leave and protect the country's northeast. We are responsible for preventing the Fire Nation from moving closer to Ba Sing Se. Naruto nodded as he glanced down at the world map and saw that the position they were all going to defend was a valuable asset to the defense of the Earth Kingdom, and that any ships that managed to get past them would be headed directly for the capital. When will we depart? Naruto looked up at the chief and asked. A couple of weeks, so we'll have plenty of time to pack and even some last-minute training, Hakoda responded. We've come a long way, Naruto said, nodding and pausing for a second. I never imagined that I would be involved in combat once more. I guess that gives us an advantage then. Hakoda laughed. There is no one alive that could fight you on equal ground. Rolling his eyes, Naruto sneered. I could probably take over the entire world if I wanted to. Then he exaggeratedly raised his hands in the air and said, I can see it now. Those so-called elite forces of the Fire Nation at Whaletail Island weren't exactly the most challenging. Naruto, the world emperor, the man with an army's worth of strength, possesses the ability to win over any woman. The greatest ramen expert in human history. I'm too lazy to do that anyhow, so forget it. After giving him a blank stare, Hakoda shook his head amusedly and said, the scary thing is that you could actually just take over an entire country if you desired to. Nah, Naruto began, returning his attention to the map. What would be the point? I would enter, seize control, and appear to be an overlord. There is no cohesiveness in that, and there will always be someone who views the position as wicked or something, leading to conflict. If I want to leave my mark, I will do it carefully, at the appropriate moment, and with the people in some way coming together. Like that alliance of shinobi you were a member of? Hakoda inquired. Yes, in a sense. But instead of a few individuals taking on the world, it's against a single nation this time. I have to take things one step at a time if I want to succeed. Without even thinking about it, I suppose the attack on the Southern Raiders 3 years ago could be advantageous to me. There has undoubtedly been a lot of talk about that day in the Fire Nation and even other places throughout the world, Hakoda said with a grunt of agreement. If you wear at least the face mask when you go out, you might be easily recognized. Yeah, immediate danger with the Fire Nation and, for the time being, neutrality with everyone else, Naruto hummed to himself. I didn't say why I attacked or where I came from. For all they know, I could be a completely different enemy. So, when and how do you intend to approach this war in your own way? Hakoda remarked. I'm not sure, Naruto shrugged. All I can do at the moment is follow my gut and trust my instincts. I suppose my role for the time being will be to assist you guys in protecting the bay. Naruto glanced back. How long will we be there, by the way? The message from the Earth Kingdom said nothing. We might be there for 1 to 10 years, for all we know. The chief had Naruto's full attention at this point. Well, I definitely don't want to wait 10 years to do something, he said. Is it possible for me to eventually distance myself? Perhaps, but only after we are certain that we can create a sound plan for ourselves. We can likely let you go and do as you please if we can ensure that every warrior is completely capable of fending off the Fire Nation without your assistance. However, I would like you to take a break and come visit our house here if you will be gone for an extended period of time. Telling everyone what you're doing and providing them with updates on our progress would truly help to ease everyone's anxiety. Naruto nodded, saying, that makes sense. How much time do you think it will take? A couple of years or a little bit more, Hakoda shrugged. That ought to be sufficient time to establish a robust defense and patrol system. In a contemplative pose, Naruto hummed and closed his eyes. A few years, huh? With a hint of excitement, he said, maybe when we get there, I'll get a chance to watch some earthbenders. Hakoda scoffed jokingly and rolled his eyes. What? Are waterbending and firebending insufficient for you? Are you attempting to take our place as our avatar? Sarcastically, Naruto asked, is that a bad thing? That is a stance to preserve global equilibrium, and after almost a century of conflict and no advancement, I would say that everyone will accept what they can. I'm not to blame for being so amazing. Naruto grinned toothily and exclaimed. Since he already had elemental jutsu and a lot of free time, you see, he wanted to see if he could bend in any way before Naruto attacked the Southern Raiders. To do this, he first used his Rinnegan and Sharingan to analyze the energy that everyone on this world possessed, called Kai, which was their version of chakra and had some notable similarities to chakra. Every Bender had the bare minimum of their own energy to survive, just as the civilians in the elemental nations did. And Kai was the source of all life energy, just like chakra, without which they could not survive. Even the glowing blue color that permeated the body was shared by chakra and Kai, but unlike chakra, which had checkpoints, called tenketsu, Kai appeared to flow like an uninterrupted stream. This certainly piqued Naruto's interest when he first started, and his curiosity only grew when he watched Katara's Kai as she tried to waterbend. Despite having almost no skill in the art, Naruto was able to see her Kai glow brighter when it was used, and he even noticed that darker strings of blue wavered around in her Kai as she tried to bend, but there was nothing else to help him because he lacked the knowledge to do it correctly. These questions only made Naruto more perplexed. What were those darker strings of blue that appeared, and did all benders have them when they interacted with their element? No matter how hard he tried, he was unable to replicate Katara's energy, and he wasn't sure if it was due to the tenketsu or just a lack of Kai. He tried using his water affinity to achieve the same effect, but it wasn't the same as bending because using chakra formed it into a predetermined technique that, while flexible with other jutsus, didn't give him the same control that bending, according to what he learned, gives people. What if all he wanted to do when he was bored was wave a blob of water? Damn it, it's the little things that matter. About 2 weeks prior to his attack, he foolishly recalled that he could try using senjutsu to absorb the natural energy of this world. Maybe this energy was different here, and he could somehow obtain it to meet the necessary bending requirements. He began to collect the natural energy surrounding him after he was able to spend a few hours apart from the tribe. Eventually, he was able to absorb some source of vitality and realized that it was, well, different. It wasn't what he was used to and definitely wasn't natural chakra, but his body still accepted it. It felt like another source of life coexisting with his very being, and he wasn't sure how it affected him, but he was certain it wasn't bad. In his own words, it was spiritually enlightening, even though he already believed he was plenty spiritual being a sage and Allah, but whatever. Was this Kai? Would he be able to control it for bending? Did every living thing here have it, just as every source of life in his world contained chakra? After a few days, Naruto found that what he believed to be Kai was beginning to show as a faint glow of white embraced his chakra in a slow pulse, but he wasn't exactly sure what to do next, so he just kept absorbing more as a small experiment. He didn't know what to make of it, so he just decided to wait and see what happened. It wasn't very noticeable because it wasn't just encircling his chakra, but actually blending in. The outcome was an icy blue energy flowing alongside a dark blue torrent with neither overpowering the other. When he was getting ready for Whaletail Island, he noticed that the icy blue stream began to flow smoothly like ordinary Kai, completely bypassing all of his tenketsu. It was as though the tenketsu created an empty pathway in the middle, or the Kai. Like energy simply phased through as if nothing were in its way. Naruto was intrigued and excited about the prospect of attempting to bend once more, but he would first need to pass Operation Clipped Wing. Naruto was keeping a close eye on the firebender's Kai paths while he was being attacked on Yanra's ship. He noticed that while their Kai glowed like Katara's, there was a crucial distinction. The firebender's Kai was dark crimson, whereas Katara's was dark blue. The only other thing that caught Naruto's attention was that, in contrast to Katara's Kai, which waved back and forth like an ocean's tide when she attempted to bend, the firebender's Kai seemed to flow in a strong and quick current towards wherever fire exited from their bodies, like their hands in this case. Naruto thought this was appropriate since the firebenders appeared to use their Kai as a sort of fuel, whereas Katara's attempted to grab any water substance in a way that he was able to do something similar with his gravity control. The first thing that came to mind when Naruto saw the various colored strings was elemental affinity. He theorized that all benders had only one affinity, with the exception of the Avatar, and that benders simply did not have an elemental nature. It seemed to be either you had it or you didn't. This was clearly different from the civilians back home, who all had at least one element that they were more naturally drawn to. It had to wait until the mission was completed because he was literally being fired at and couldn't really focus on these thoughts. He resumed the bending process on the boat ride back to the South Pole, but this time he used fire. Observing the soldier's professional execution of the bending process made him believe that it would be simpler to replicate and determine whether this new power source was Kai or something similar. His experience with experimental seals and jutsus could attest to the fact that he didn't want to blow himself up or anything, so he took it slow because he had spent a good deal of time on the open ocean. In light of this, rather than using an overt attack or technique as he was accustomed to, he merely wanted to create a basic flame. He tried to focus his fire nature into his newfound energy for the first time after he guessed that bending was caused by Kai and an affinity. At first, it was slow, but eventually, he saw the same crimson strings from before. This gave Naruto a lot of excitement and motivated him to keep going. Like the firebenders, he was able to control the flow of this special energy around the Patola Mountains of the Southern Air Temple, which is where he ultimately found the flame he was seeking. He kept practicing simple fireballs on the ship's side, feeling as victorious as when he first gained his shinobi status. He really got to work after being welcomed back into the tribe. He wanted to see how strong his controlled flames were in comparison to jutsu away from the community, and that's when he made an intriguing discovery. When he shot simple flames into the air using what he believed to be basic bending and viewed them through the Rinnegan, he saw that they weren't like the firebenders' flames. There were still traces of chakra in his flames, unlike the Fire Nation soldiers. Did this give him more power and control? Did it make his bending more akin to ninjutsu? Did it fill his coils with some strange chakra mixture? He didn't know, but it had worked so far, so he used firebending in the same manner as his Kaiden jutsus. And he was a huge success. Through bending, he was able to recreate jutsus such as Ga-Ria, Ka no Jutsu, Great Dragon Fire Technique, and Ga-Kakia, no Jutsu, Great Fireball Technique, without the need for hand seals or even a genuine consideration of chakra. For a typical firebender, their fire would just be controlled fire. Naruto's flames, on the other hand, had a boost that was enhanced by chakra. All he knew was that although it possessed the power of elemental ninjutsu, it was created and controlled in the manner of benders. Was this similar to sealless jutsu or extra powered bending? Naruto has yet to come up with a name for this, despite his best efforts. Kai jutsu, chakra bending, and jutsu bending weren't particularly creative. He was thrilled with this discovery, though, and after a few weeks of practicing and improving his fire bending skills in secret, he demonstrated it to the tribe. Except for the elderly man who yelled, "They're back!" They were in complete awe. It was a tragic day for the boy with the boomerang. He had a regretful farewell speech and everything. He was able to run 2 feet away before tripping into an abandoned snow fort and knocking it down, which also happened to be Sokka's pride and joy. Never forget. Nevertheless, after Naruto finished demonstrating his new abilities, he said he would try practicing waterbending. Katara was overjoyed by this development and even thought of herself as Naruto's Sifu because she had been bending for a longer period of time than him. However, this was only temporary, as after the first hour. After applying his water nature and mimicking Katara's natural Kai flow, Naruto was able to start levitating snow because he understood the concept. Katara then begged Naruto to help her after feeling a little sad and envious, and even though he was already going to say yes, her puppy dog Isa, which all females seemed to have, only made him give in more quickly. Over the course of the following 3 years, the children in his warrior program and the hardened warriors participated in increasingly challenging training, which was interspersed with daily life in the water tribe. In Katara's case, she had to train like everyone else but concentrated more on bending than hand combat. Her abilities have come along quite nicely, but she was still no match for Naruto. The usefulness of shadow clones. Got to love it. He would work them all to near exhaustion, but the results were satisfactory. They all increased their strength, speed, stamina, and overall fighting capabilities. Since he was originally a wind user, Naruto was unable to fully grasp either earthbending or airbending, which he believed to be complete bullshit. He reasoned that, similar to water and fire, he would need to watch a bender and how they used their Kai, but since there were so few airbenders, that seemed out of his grasp. Sure, he still had Tanjutsus, but he wanted total control like the air nomad monks. Earthbending was obviously easier, but he had to wait until he had a reason to travel to the Earth Kingdom. It was now on display in front of him, protecting Chameleon Bay. Awesome, was Hakoda's sarcastic response. With a smirk, Naruto crossed his arms and said, "Are you jealous?" They began leaving the tent where classes were normally held after Hakoda waved him off with indifference, saying, Yeah. You want to start training now since we got done with our discussion early?" "Yes," Naruto said, nodding. "Before we depart, I want everyone to be as productive as possible." "All right then, but we still have to break the news to the rest of the tribe. We can just have all the men tell their families after training is done and word will quickly get around to everyone else." "I'll go gather everyone then," Hakoda said with a grunt of agreement. "I'll see you in about 20 minutes at the usual location." "Okay then, see ya." After exchanging nods, Hakoda left to alert the warriors and junior warriors, while Naruto went to the open space by the shore where training was typically conducted. Shore area. Half an hour later. "All right, everyone, I or my clones will give you more instructions once you split off like yesterday." In front of the small group of warriors undergoing training, Naruto shouted. They nodded, and the children and teenagers followed the original Naruto, while the adults followed 10 freshly made clones. To ensure safety, the two groups were kept apart by roughly 50 yards. The original Naruto turned to face the children when he had arrived at his intended location and said, "All right, today we are going to improve your evasion skills." He pointed to Katara and said, "This is why I'm having Katara bend snowballs at you as if they were fireballs or other projectiles in real battle." Katara appeared to smile a little at that. "While your attacking is decent and improving, I've noticed that a lot of you can't dodge for crap." "What about her training in evasion?" a girl inquired. "She has to dodge my snowballs when you're all done," Naruto said with a sly smile. A look of mild fear had taken the place of Katara's smirk. "Yay," she said, looking down. With a laugh, Naruto patted her head and said, "And you know that I don't take any training lightly. You're the one that asked for tougher training, my proto-copyright ga copyright." She answered meekly, "I know. When are we all going to raise the level to our training anyway?" Sokka then announced his presence. He asked, receiving a variety of nods from the others, "I'm fairly certain we can handle it by now." With a playful smile, Naruto said, "Oh, do my adorable little warriors want to work on something more challenging?" They nodded once more. "Maybe you'd like to try what your fathers are doing." In the distance behind them, Naruto smirked and pointed, and everyone appeared to become tense and excited where they were standing. This was the adult version of Naruto's battle simulation, and Kami made it work. With real firebenders attacking, Hakoda and the others were gaining valuable experience even though Naruto didn't exactly know how they fought in their entirety. They turned around, their mouths hanging open in fright and mild disbelief, as all of the adults were constantly dodging fire and attempting to attack Naruto's clones, who had now been transformed to look like the Southern Raiders. Naruto continued to grin as all the children turned back to face him. "Still think you can handle it?" They gave a quick negative shake of their heads. "Well, until then," Naruto remarked, bending a snowball into his hand. Snowballs. While the children's world was full of snow, perspiration, and tears, the adults spent the remainder of the day honing their craft. Hakoda's igloo later that night. "You're going to leave?" After they had all finished dinner, Kya asked, looking at her husband and Naruto with a hint of shock. "Our guys we sent a while back to Ba Sing Se to offer support came back yesterday with a request to guard Chameleon Bay in the Eastern Sea," Hakoda said with a somewhat somber nod. "Since our primary responsibility is defense, we won't be seeking conflict." After a moment of silence, Kya nodded, her eyes showing a hint of melancholy. "When?" she just inquired. 2 weeks. "How much time?" With the same expression as her mother, but with more sparkle in her eyes, Katara asked from the side. Sighing, Hakoda said, "I don't know. Although if we are secure enough, we'll send Naruto back to visit you guys." Kya and her kids appeared more dejected at that. At least a few years. The news made them all a little happier, but they were still sad. "Are all the fighters leaving?" There was a brief pause before Sokka asked. "Yes," Naruto said, nodding. "We're fairly certain that the Fire Nation won't come over here, and we need as many people as possible." "No, Sokka, you can't come." As his next silent query was addressed, Sokka bowed his head. "Are you guys going to be in danger?" Katara asked, turning to face Naruto and her father, she inquired. In response to the 13-year-old, Naruto grinned and said, "We'll be as safe as we can, but we are going to a war zone after all." Katara gave a sorrowful nod. "Stop being so depressed." With his characteristic grin, Naruto declared, "Your old man and the other old farts are more than ready for the Fire Nation after all the training I put them through." With the exception of Hakoda, everyone suppressed a chuckle as the man stared blankly at Naruto and uttered the words, "Old?" When everyone finally started laughing, the depressing atmosphere was totally broken. 2 weeks later, Southern Water Tribe shores. There was a depressing silence, broken only by the occasional mumbled farewell and suppressed whimper that managed to escape its creator's lips. The sounds of crunching snow and shifting tides did not reach the ears of those who were deeply affected by the sun's descent, with the smallest remnants of its brightness barely remaining in the open sky. The men packing everything had blank faces, knowing that it would be a long time before they could return to their families, if at all. Even if it was just a few minutes before they too had the opportunity to say goodbye, they were dreading it. Equipment and other necessities were just about to be finished being brought onto the small fleet of cutter-sailing ships, each with a lantern hanging at the front. It was only after completing their individual tasks that they broke their emotionless Section 8 and approached their wives, sons, and daughters, their hearts heavy at the mere thought of not seeing their loved ones' faces for years. While some were openly expressing their heartache with choked sobs and comforting words, others simply held each other tightly in silence while letting out lingering tears. At the moment, Kya and Katara were crying uncontrollably, while Sokka clenched his eyes shut and had a quivering lip as their chief was in the embrace of his wife and children in a melancholy silence. Footsteps behind Hakoda warned the family that someone else was coming, and they hardly looked up to see it was the blonde they had grown to love over the years, with a sad smile on his whiskered face and his normally cheerful blue eyes slightly downtrodden. He sighed lightly and said, barely audible, everything's ready to go Hakoda. They merely created a gap between Kya and Katara without responding vocally. With a slightly enlarged smile, he walked forward and joined them, sniffing as he wrapped his arms around their bodies as far as he could and saying, I'm going to really miss you guys. In response, the family gave each other even closer embraces. They gradually drifted apart, but they continued to touch someone's shoulder or arm. In an attempt to lighten the mood, Kya sobbed and said, you guys better come back alive or I swear I'll revive you and kill you myself. Naruto laughed as they all felt the corners of their mouths quiver a little. Naruto struggled to maintain his best foxy smile as he said, don't worry, if Hakoda or anyone else screws up, I'll save their asses. He was instantly slapped upside the head, so he was unable to think of anything else. Naruto pouted at Kya, who was glaring at him sharply, and put a hand where he had been struck. The only thing she said was, language. Oh, hurry up. Sokka and Katara are no longer quite children. In a few years, they will essentially be adults, he complained. With the exception of Naruto and Kya, everyone was able to temporarily forget their sadness and smile with amusement. I don't care, Kya said, poking Naruto in the chest. I refuse to allow your filthy mouth to corrupt them. My unclean mouth? You ought to listen to Hakoda and the others. All right, to make our schedule, we should probably start moving. With a nervous drop of sweat forming, Hakoda interrupted. After giving him a suspicious look, Kya changed her expression to one of sadness and gave Naruto and her husband a tight hug, one arm around their necks. She took a step back and planted a brief but intense kiss on Hakoda's lips and a maternal kiss on Naruto's cheek after they exchanged a single arm hug. Naruto muttered without humor, damn, get an igloo you two. Everyone laughed a little as the couple parted ways. Gripping the 14-year-old's shoulder, Hakoda turned to face his kids and said, Sokka, you're the man of the family now and I want you to protect your mother and sister. As though he had been given an order by his superior on the battlefield, Sokka nodded gravely. His father then extended his arm, and Sokka reciprocated, locking forearms and leaning into a manly embrace while Hakoda patted his son's back. They took a step back before Katara unexpectedly glomped on Hakoda. Take care of your mother and make sure Sokka doesn't do anything foolish, okay? He said, putting his arms around her with equal vigor and kissing the top of her head, he said in jest. Katara nodded and smiled at him, then broke the embrace and wiped away a tear. With Naruto by his side and his family in front of him, he smiled sadly one last time before saying, remember that I love you free and I'll try and get back as soon as I can. Naruto approached Katara and Sokka after they nodded. Alright, keep working out while we're away. I placed a book with instructions on the dinner table. Make sure none of the other warriors.in. Training become lazy and adhere to the program I have set up for you. I'll return as fast as I can before I head off to travel more, and who knows, maybe I'll take you guys with me, they said, nodding in agreement before being abruptly lifted off the ground in a final bear hug. As he put them back down and allowed them to try to breathe again, Naruto spoke. After regaining their composure, they enthusiastically nodded in anticipation of the opportunity to travel beyond the South Pole. As a tri-pronged kunai materialized in his hand from the seal on his wrist, Naruto began, and one last thing, saying, throw this to call me, but it's for emergencies only, okay? As he handed Katara his father's renowned weapon, he remarked, it's better to be safe than sorry, even though I'm not sure if I can teleport that far or how energy-intensive it is. He held out his fist and concluded, take care of yourselves. Sokka gave him a sly smirk and a back bump, but Katara just stood there for a moment looking like she was struggling a little, then she walked past his fist and gave him a tender kiss on the cheek rather than a quick peck. With her eyes fixed on the snowy ground and a noticeable flush, she finished and hurried to stand beside Sokka and her mother, Kya grinning knowingly and Sokka raising an eyebrow in surprise and bewilderment. A faint flush appeared on Naruto's cheeks, but he shook it off and laughed. You're getting a bit brazen, aren't you, Katara? As Katara's face turned redder, he teased. He chuckled a little more loudly, then turned to face Hakoda and nodded, his expression growing serious. He nodded back, and after giving the family one final smile, they turned to head for the ships. All of the warriors eventually boarded their ships one by one and began to slowly sail away. A few people held up their own lanterns, and the rest of the villagers, about 100 in number, gathered to watch their loved ones drift away in the light fog. Sokka's mother and sister were hugging him on either side as he held one. All they could hear was the sound of the shifting tides and the embrace of the glow of the now fully risen moon as the same thought crept into everyone's thoughts. Remain safe. A lone cutter sailing ship was moving steadily through the southern waters, and the ocean beneath the mostly clear sky was calm. How have things been going for everyone? If you didn't include his two clones who were currently manning the sails, he was thought to be the ship's lone passenger. The wind was blowing through the man's spiky blonde hair carelessly, and his whiskered face was sporting an uncontrollably excited foxy smile. This was also evident in his blue eyes, which darted back and forth in the hopes that time would move more quickly. One of the clones said, "You know, boss," as he adjusted the sail. "If you can't wait, why don't you just use waterbending to get there faster?" The man crossed his black, sleeved arms and turned to face the clone. The hood and face mask were still fastened loosely around his neck, and a dark orange stripe that was noticeably new ran from the inside of his sleeves down the sides until it ended at the hem near his hips. The white symbols that matched his guarded gloves were still proudly worn on his shoulders. "Nah. While I do want to get back home quickly, I think it'll be even better if I take my time and let all the excitement build up." The clone shrugged indifferently, which is strange because he should be feeling the same excitement. "You're only torturing yourself further, but whatever. I suppose everyone has their own peculiarities." The original was barely able to control his restless body as he turned around and faced forward on the front of the ship. Did anyone really change? Have all the children grown significantly? Were they attacked? No, they would have given me a call, but what if they were unable to do so in time? Trying not to sound like a certain Kumo shinobi, he thought to himself, what if they were captured and taken to a prison in the Fire Nation and just sat there scared waiting for me to? No, no, no. Get a hold of yourself, Naruto. But from now on, it's going to be much more exciting. And he wasn't lying. His duties prevented him from traveling much, even though he did have a chance to finally reach the Earth Kingdom. He spent a significant portion of his 3-year tour with the warriors establishing a basic set of procedures and getting settled in. In order to properly position their patrols and set up plans for various events, there was a lot of scouting. Instead of the typical mountainous walls that surrounded most of the shores, the main camp was located west of the bay on a respectably large open beachfront that opened from a small valley. They could detect enemy naval forces attempting to pass through from this vantage point, but they never had to be concerned because scouts were already stationed close to the center of the inlet, ready to quickly issue a warning. When the Fire Nation rarely attacked them, they would swiftly dispatch one of their smaller, faster ships to assemble the necessary forces for more than a year. If Naruto wasn't on duty, he would go to the particular Hiraishin seal on the ship that was currently on patrol. To keep everyone hidden until it was too late, he would cast a genjutsu as soon as he arrived. They would all board the metal warships in total surprise and fight to the best of their abilities as soon as their vessels were within proper range. Because of Naruto's years of training, Hakoda and his men have nearly always survived. Though there were a few near misses, there were thankfully no fatalities despite the odd severe burn or spearman stab wound. The tribesmen understood and firmly believed that Naruto should never face the enemy directly, even with their blonde companion, who was a powerhouse. If he did, all of their preparations would be in vain. Naruto made it very clear that he would not be holding their hands, and he soon discovered that this was not a concern. To the widespread admiration of the fighters, he did intervene when the fighting seemed too much to bear and used his medical ninjutsu to treat wounds. On the battlefield, Naruto performed his duties by disguising himself as one of the other Water Tribe fighters with the henge and using taijutsu and a little swordplay to either knock out or seriously hurt his opponents enough to remove them from the battle. As it turns out, they weren't really needed, so he didn't exactly want to show off who he was or what he could do until the time was right. The Fire Nation's forces were surprisingly comparable to the warriors most of the time and weren't particularly large. The Water Tribe's numerous victories demonstrate how effective their offensive capabilities were. Naruto and the others would either take prisoners and deliver them to a planned Earth Kingdom patrol later, or they would just let them run with their tails between their legs, once it became clear that the fight was in their favor. However, there was the occasional Fire Nation grunt that believed he could defeat them, only to die if he was unable to be incapacitated. This was rare, and the situation was always handled by one of the tribesmen. Since his brothers-in-arms knew they needed this experience, Naruto refused to interfere at their request. The few ships that were saved from the captured ones were disassembled by Earth Kingdom engineers, thoroughly cleaned of anything useful, and used for research or scrap. Naruto was finally able to witness some earthbending during this time. The Earth Kingdom soldiers were still getting ready to depart when they all first arrived at the bay, so they had to give Hakoda instructions. Naruto only needed to request to see their capabilities, stating that he had always wished to observe the power of their military. They readily complied because they were pampered and had the opportunity to brag about their superiority to a fictitious foreign non-bender. Under a henge to conceal his true appearance in order to evade inquiries, Naruto was able to examine how fully developed earth-benders operated. Their kai had wavy strings of green that alternated between light and dark all the time, just as he had suspected. In a way, they grabbed their element when they bent, much like waterbending, but instead of their kai waving, it remained firmly in place like a mountain on the ground. They made quick walls out of the ground for defense, levitated earth from pebbles to boulders, and even sank their feet into the ground to defend themselves in the event of a hypothetical attack. When it was all over, the soldiers departed, and Naruto immediately began learning earthbending on his own in his spare time. He mostly let clones handle the rest after he gained control over it by hovering rocks and freely manipulating the dirt. Because they were accustomed to the blonde's enigmatic antics and abilities, his fellow warriors' initial reaction to his advancement was one of awe, which soon gave way to amusement and almost no surprise. Naruto was only able to travel to a few nearby small villages, which was helpful even though it didn't have a significant impact on him. He was able to obtain the nation's currency while he was there. After some practice, he was able to use yin-yang release to create the copper, silver, and gold pieces out of thin air. This added to the slowly expanding list of items he could magically create, which also included sealing paper and ink, kunai, shuriken, miso ramen, beef ramen, and of course, pork ramen. Everybody has different priorities. Even though he was aware that his wealth was essentially limitless, he made a mental agreement that it wouldn't be misused. His world was saved by him, after all the mooching Arrow Sennin did to his Gama-chan. He deserves to treat himself once in a while. The stories that could be told by that toad wallet are absolutely terrifying. Despite having this source of income, all he actually did was overindulge in food at certain food stands, leave generous tips, and even provide some homeless people and those in need with some peace of mind by giving them a small bag of anonymous silver or gold pieces. Everyone's only memory was of a man with uncommon blonde hair walking by, and then, to their complete delight, they suddenly had newfound wealth next to them. Even though he had no idea what to do with his money and wasn't looking to show it off, he knew that he always liked to make someone's life a little bit better, especially since he was aware of how difficult financial times could be. He had plenty of the food and clothing that villagers needed to survive, so it's not like there were any incredible things to purchase. For more than half of his time working with the warriors, these brief visits and the sporadic defense against the Fire Nation persisted until Hakoda was able to create something that would give them an advantage in future battles. The Tangle Mine was created by fusing seaweed, skunk fish, dried animal hide, and bamboo. Hakoda created this reasonably sized round mine to explode when struck by a ship. When it explodes, seaweed is released to clog the ship's propellers and stop it cold in its tracks, and the skunk fish's foul stench would drive people to flee the ship. After that, the helpless soldiers would either be captured with little to no resistance or picked up on an ally ship for a tactical retreat. The Tangle Mine was given the moniker, Stink in Sink, by Hakoda. The only person who laughed was him. In any case, the enemy's attacks became less frequent and more manageable with this defensive weapon in their arsenal. The warriors were put to the test during the final few months leading up to the anniversary of 3 years since their initial arrival. They essentially told Naruto to remain at base camp because they insisted that it was time for them to start working without him. Only a few attacks occurred, and they were quickly dealt with only minor flesh wounds and some difficulty, but nothing they couldn't manage. Shortly after 3 years had officially elapsed, they made the decision that Naruto should go off and pursue his own interests, but not before returning to the South Pole and comforting their loved ones. Naruto embarked on his journey to return to the snowy regions that he now called home after a brief farewell and a few sincere farewells. And now here we are. A little bit more, just a bit more, just a. As Naruto stared at the breathtaking scene in the distant, partly overcast skies, his thoughts were abruptly interrupted. A massive beam of white light with a faint blue tint began from an invisible source encircled by glaciers. As waves of the same energy encircled it, resembling the celestial lights that were known to be nearby, the lone stream shot up and appeared to instantly penetrate the heavens above. The blonde shinobi found it so astounding that all he and his replicas could do was stare with wide eyes and gaping mouths. Naruto observed that the beam was beginning to thin out and the surrounding ripples were beginning to disappear within the glowing upper atmosphere after a brief period of this continuing. He saw a faint agitation above the distant water's surface as this was taking place. He barely had time to blink before a shockwave hit him as soon as he focused all of his attention on this new display. In the brief moment he had to think, he realized that it wasn't like the shockwaves he was used to from explosions. This was a tiny transparent wall that appeared to be the same color as the lights in the sky, in contrast to the typical push of energy at high velocity followed by the sound of detonation. He was shocked to hear nothing but the sound of a gentle wind when it reached his form. Rather than being shoved, he felt the energy seem to start absorbing into his coils. Then, as his vision started to fade into darkness, his breath suddenly caught in his throat. The pops of his now displaced clones, his body falling backwards, and the rapidly pulsating seal on his abdomen were the only things he could notice before he passed out. Slowly and groggily, two blue irises opened to the surrounding scenery before rapidly closing as the abrupt burst of light entered their field of vision. Until the fogginess they witnessed began to dissipate, they fluttered. When the surroundings were fully exposed, the owner hardly managed to say 2 words before the eyes widened to their maximum width. Naruto uttered a barely audible, "Holy shit." One of the most breathtaking sights he had the good fortune to witness in his life was what triggered this reaction. As far as his trained eyes could see, the vast ocean stretched out in front of him. The golden rays of sunlight that peeked through the various fluffy clouds with a hint of gray shimmered on its gentle, crystal clear waters. His attention was drawn to the small shoreline in front of him and downhill by the sounds of the low tides. In a slow, steady rhythm, he saw the water pushing and pulling, covering the reachable sand and darkening its color repeatedly. His gaze lingered on this scene for a while before moving on to the remaining arid sand and eventually noticing that it was joined to a sizable expanse of well-kept grass. He eventually realized he had woken up on the side of a fairly large hill after following the green traces up to where he was sitting. Glancing to his right, he lightly touched the green blades with his fingertips, giving them a slight tickle. He took a deep breath through his nose, smelling the salty air with a hint of impending rain. As he collapsed back onto his back and spread out his limbs, he couldn't help but laugh a little at the sight before him, the feel of the grass, and the smell filling his nostrils. "I'm back," he murmured to himself, feeling both a little surprised and delighted. This was a fitting response in light of he hasn't been in his mindscape in a long time. He closed his eyes once more and just lay there peacefully, taking in the atmosphere for what it was worth. While a soft breeze used just enough of its strength to gently sway Naruto's hair, clothing, and the nearby blades of green, the ocean's waves softly lulled him. Small amounts of the sun's light and warmth peeked out of the clouds, just like over the ocean, onto him in a perfect balance so that he wasn't too hot or cold, and its escaping rays didn't irritate his eyes in the slightest. But why now? He furrowed his brows in amazement, until I absorbed what the hell that was. Kai. I was constantly cut off. It seems to have opened the way for me to arrive here, but if I am here, doesn't that imply? Naruto sat up in an attempt to locate the source as the breeze abruptly intensified into a fierce wind. On the top of the hill, just behind him and to his right, he saw the wisps of wind begin to congregate in a sort of miniature tornado. Until the blades that were visible in the gust began to turn crimson, a color that the blonde was all too familiar with, he wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Naruto just lay back down with a fairly clear understanding of what was going on, grinning with relief and joy. He settled in, closed his eyes again, put his hands behind his head, and simply let the event unfold, unconcerned with his hair ruffling and wearing a calm smile that would not go away. The wind ceased after what felt like an eternity, and Naruto heard what he thought was a deep, animal-like yawn, followed by the grunts one would make when stretching. He could almost feel his new companion scanning his surroundings before focusing on him and gazing at his comfortable posture. Before they stopped and the sounds of a massive body shifting to lie on the nearby hill reverberated slightly in the quiet area, Naruto heard a few heavy steps being taken, which caused the tiniest rumbles in the ground. Silence spread swiftly through the mindscape. It didn't unnerve Naruto in the least. Conversely, he struggled to control the sudden anxiety that felt like it was about to explode out of him in the hopes that this new presence would break the ice between them. A deep voice rumbled, "We did it." Naruto answered, "Yeah, we did." The two appeared to enjoy this peaceful moment in the serene environment as silence fell between them once more. Naruto looked up and abruptly said, "I really missed you, Kurama." As it lay on its belly with its chin resting on crossed arms, Kurama rolled its now open red eyes and scoffed. The fox appeared to smile amusedly and said, "Don't get all sappy on me, Gaki. I doubt it took you that long to recover. Hell, I thought we were gonna die back there." With his right eye fixed on his tenant, Naruto's eyebrow quirked. "So even after all those heart speeches of confidence, you still believed we could have lost? Not lose, but maybe go down with the ship, figuratively speaking." For a moment, Naruto just stared, then rolled his eyes and continued to look ahead until Kurama's words finally reached him. "Wait, it didn't take that long to get better? Is Kurama unaware?" Kurama interrupted Naruto's train of thought by asking, "New duds, Naruto?" He noticed the fox pointing to the new garments around his neck and his slightly altered shirt. He was still wearing his typical cargo pants and boots, but he switched between the ones the tribe had given him. Naruto lifted the face mask to reveal the distinctive design. Yeah, he said, his thoughts still a little disorganized. I thought it was the time to try something different. Kurama's smirk deepened and its narrowed eyes widened slightly. It's about damn time you started to worship me. I thought you were a lost cause. Pulling the black cloth back down, Naruto gave Kurama a blank stare. Don't get too full of yourself, furball. This time it was the fox's eyebrow that moved. By the way, Naruto began before Kurama could say anything. What was up with that reforming wind crap you just did? The fox shrugged, seemingly carelessly. Then a curious expression took over its furry features. Not sure, doesn't really matter. I'm here, aren't I? Where's everyone else anyway? I thought we would have a proper family reunion without all of that end of the world bullshit. You're the first I've seen actually, but I can still feel them like I did you before you showed up again. So I've been asleep or something. Uncertain of what had happened, Naruto shrugged. I guess absorbing all of that chakra did something to disrupt our connection somehow, but I absorbed some sort of energy that looks to have fixed it. For all I know, you came back first since we've always been stuck together, so you somehow took priority. Energy? Chakra? The blonde shrugged once more. Neither of them really dug too far into it because they had nothing else to do. Wait. What about Kaguya? I've been wondering about that too, and I think I might feel her along with the rest of the Biju. Kurama scoffed once more. Great. Now I might have to live with my dysfunctional family and a psychopath. Could be worse. She could have absorbed all of our chakra and we would have died. Kurama gave in without saying so. Then another thought intruded into the fox's consciousness. Before observing Naruto instantly tense up and turn away from the sea, it asked, so how's being Hokage treating ya? Everything you hoped it would be? You've gotta be fucking kidding me. Kurama. Naruto opened his mouth to deliver the news, but was cut off. Even after all that, you still didn't get the stupid hat? Listen. They gave it to the duck ass, didn't they? Just. Who the hell wants a duck's ass overlooking them from the monument? Who? If you would just. After all that crap he did to everyone, how in the world would he be pardoned in the first place? Hell, the next thing you tell me is that he stole the Hyuga girl from you right when you finally had the courage to take action. Hey, Iya. And I swear to Kami, if that little shit turned on us again, I'm going to get out of here in bunny ears. Oi. The 9-tailed demon rose from its laying position and glared down at the now standing blonde, a murderous fire instantly igniting within its bloody red irises. You swore you would never. Damn it, just shut up for a second. While the former was attempting to gather his thoughts, Kurama and Naruto simply narrowed their eyes and stared at one another. After a moment, Naruto let out a sigh and stroked his spiky hair wearily. Then, with a heavy sadness in his blue eyes, he said, Kurama. No, I'm not Hokage. I haven't stepped foot into Konoha in a long time. I haven't even been in the elemental nations since the end of the war. Kurama's once angry eyes grew wide. What the hell are you talking about? Kurama. Something happened after the sealing. Something big. How much do you remember? Naruto asked his partner, still grieving. I just remember the sealing almost being complete, a bright light, and now I'm here. Frustrated, Naruto used his right thumb and index finger to rub the bridge of his nose. He whispered, well, here we go. What? Kurama asked, feeling a sense of dread rising in its stomach. With an exaggerated sigh, Naruto gave his tenant the most serious look he could muster. I haven't been in our dimension for a little over 8 years. The fox's mouth hung open in utter disbelief, and its eyebrows shot up to unthinkable heights as if it were beating the impossible. You're joking, right? Naruto's no bullshit stare persisted. Kurama, still adjusting to the circumstances, said, okay, you're not joking. Well shit. But how the hell did that happen? Naruto maintained his severe demeanor while staring blankly. Do you really find it hard to believe that once shit went down, there wouldn't be a stray dimension to swallow me up? Especially with my unpredictable luck. Or bad luck. I don't even know anymore, he said as he looked defeated at the ground. The fox then appeared somewhat sheepish, as much as a massive mass of sentient chakra could. I guess not. But still. 8 years in a different dimension. That's a lot to take in, Kit. Naruto let out another deep sigh. I know. The beginning was a little too much to handle mentally, but I guess I moved on over time. I miss my friends to death and think about them all the time, but as long as everyone else is safe, I can accept this. I saw them make it back before getting stuck in this dimension. Naruto was sitting cross-legged now, ripping tiny grass blades mindlessly every few seconds. Kurama could only watch as an awkward silence descended upon them, but it was soon broken when Naruto recalled one or two important details he had not yet disclosed. However, he was defeated when Kurama made a brief remark first. For 8 years going by, you don't look a day older. He looked back up at the fox, and as understanding swiftly entered its crimson eyes, he said, "Yeah. I've kinda been wondering about that for a while. Ya no. Considering the chakra I absorbed?" As it closed its eyes in focus, Kurama asked, "Give me a moment." As Kurama concentrated on Naruto's chakra and general vitals, energy could be felt vibrating through the atmosphere. Then, as they looked at the eager and inquisitive blonde, red eyes suddenly opened in shock. "What the hell have you been doing? There's some sort of energy flowing alongside your chakra. Which is a lot more potent than before, I might add. Not surprising with the chakra you sealed in yourself, but still." The Kyuubi became even more perplexed when Naruto replied, "I think that energy is Kai." Naruto nodded. "Kai? Well, whatever the hell it is, it's here to stay, and seems safe. For now. Wait a minute. What? I think I know why you haven't physically changed. Even if you're an Uzumaki, something was bound to change. And from what I can tell, well, I think we're going to be stuck together longer than you thought." "Explain." "With your longevity pretty much supercharged by what happened, you have a few Uzumaki lifetimes left in you." After a moment of silence and a distant expression, Naruto collected himself and uttered a single, "Fuck." "Not too excited?" asked Kurama, which was now back on the ground and swaying a few of its tails involuntarily. Before lying back down and gathering his thoughts, Naruto said, "You may be used to living for a long-ass time, but I'm not. I'm tired of seeing people I care about die. I knew I would anyway, but not to this extent. And I figured something like this would happen. But I don't know." His face took on a conflicted expression. Even though he kind of anticipated this, accepting it wasn't any simpler. If someone knew they would live for generations after their time should have ended, how would they feel? It's true that some people wished they could live longer and enjoy life to the fullest, but this was a bit excessive. Even though he knew he still had a long way to go, he would have to witness the relationships he had formed in this new life being severed after a considerable amount of time. The faces of all his new friends were almost always in the forefront of his thoughts, growing older in front of him before disintegrating and taking off like dust in the wind. Then he reasoned that rather than never knowing when tomorrow would be the last, he should consider himself at least somewhat fortunate to be able to watch them age. Just like a shinobi's life. Naruto turned back to face his animal friend. "Kurama, there is a couple of things you should know that happened." The fox drew lead. "Now what?" Naruto simply closed his eyes, and the familiar metallic purple with its black rings surrounding the pupil appeared as soon as they opened. Kurama's eyes widened once more, as if it was considering what to say next. However, Kurama repeated his actions without giving Naruto a chance to speak, revealing the red eyes that have repeatedly been a thorn in the fox's side. Although Kurama's eyes narrowed, it was still obvious that he was shocked. The fox was still gathering the right answer, as evidenced by the contemplation in the slitted orbs. After deactivating his dujutsu, Naruto and Kurama stared at each other for several minutes. Kurama finally responded by sighing loudly and exaggeratedly before settling back in and shutting its eyes. "I should really just expect this kind of shit by now considering it's you." Then Naruto glared accusingly at the scene. "What's that supposed to mean?" In response to the remark about the bunny ear, Kurama asked, "Do you really want me to answer that, fishcake?" After merely clicking his tongue in frustration, Naruto returned to the hill and made himself as comfortable as he could. He whispered to himself, "Whatever. And it's for Maelstrom, damn it." He was aware that, despite his slightly irascible appearance, he missed their old arguments. Compared to their initial encounter, which included Kurama's wish to flee in Naruto's previous battle with the fox's chakra, as well as the icy feelings that pervaded their interactions, this was their own small method of getting along and was a significant improvement. They have undoubtedly advanced significantly since then. Hell, aside from the occasional insults that occasionally made Naruto want to kick the fox in its non-existent balls, they even had a few sincere conversations prior to this whole dimension fiasco that essentially eliminated any resentment. "So now what?" Kurama reprimanded Naruto, snapping him out of his reverie. Naruto said languidly. "Our greatest enemies are gone. We are in a completely different world apparently, and it's been 8 damn years. What the hell have you been doing in all of that time? I'm guessing you at least found people, thanked Kami. You could have just landed in a desert or ice world or something and just eventually die, and me with you no less." With shadows and uncovered light constantly enveloping his body, Naruto gazed up at the slowly moving clouds that were softly gliding across the sky. The sight almost stopped the current stream of thought in his head and seemed to calm him down rather quickly. Perhaps Shikamaru wasn't a total slacker for nothing? He muttered, that would have sucked. He laughed lightly and with only a hint of humor, saying, you would have eventually reformed in a completely useless world with nothing to do. At least I would have died. Kurama muttered, good thing you ended up wherever the hell we are. He shuddered a little at the idea of such a remote world with nothing but the unchanging surroundings. The fox did enjoy spending a significant amount of time alone, but everything has its limits, particularly boredom, which is unavoidable. Naruto yawned after saying, yup. You've settled in this dimension nicely? Yup. Been busy? Yup. Kept training? Yuppity yup. Are you a dumbass? Nope. Kurama rolled his eyes. After all, the Gaki was listening. Well, what have you been doing in nearly a decade? Naruto yawned once more. Well, I'm actually on my way to where I first dropped in and… Shit. That's what I was doing. Naruto swiftly got up to confront Kurama and let out an exclamation. He was about to leave when he exclaimed, see ya, bunny ears. Sorry, gotta do something outside. Just look through my memories and find out what's been going on and I'll talk to you later. Kurama was about to respond, but Naruto had already vanished, leaving the fox to complain. Fishcake son of a bitch. When Naruto opened his eyes, he saw the same gray sky. He noticed that the ship was not sailing as he had left it, so he got off his back and stood up. When he noticed that the ship's bow was now firmly embedded in the icy ground that comprised all of the shores, he promptly responded to this question. With a crunch, Naruto jumped over the front deck and onto the snowy ground, thinking, well, at least I stopped, and there doesn't seem to be any bad damage. Before examining his surroundings, he got down on his knees and looked at the point where the ship and ice met. Naturally, there was nothing but snow on land, but Naruto recognized some glacial formations near the coast. All right, let's see. I believe we have hunted and fished here a few times. Perhaps it's a few miles north of the village. That's not too horrible. Since it would be quicker than returning to the sea, I suppose I could seal the ship and walk from here. Then, from one of the seals on his arms, Naruto took out a sizable storage scroll, opened it, and placed it neatly on the ground. The elaborate design on the paper was more sophisticated than the ones on both of his arms because it was designed to accommodate a lot more stuff, including furniture, tools, camping equipment, and pretty much anything. The act was completed with a swift chakra pulse and a hand on the boat and seal. After rolling the scroll back up, Naruto sealed it in its proper location on his arm once more. Naruto focused his chakra into his legs to start moving quickly because he had nothing else to do but return home, but he abruptly gave in when he felt the familiar pull of chakra. My kanai Hiraishin? Right now, an emergency? Strange timing? Pulling the mask to the bridge of his nose and the hood over his head, he exhaled a little and concentrated on the kunai's chakra signature. Before disappearing in a burst of yellow, he muttered, might as well make a good entrance. The faint howls of the icy wind and the tiny trail of footprints were all that remained of him. Naruto found himself in the snow-covered area he unconsciously recognized as his home in another brilliant flash. His senses went into overdrive shortly after his feet hit the snow, and he didn't have to wait to find out why. He saw a wave of red flames coming straight at him as soon as his eyes opened to take in the view. He was caught off guard and automatically fired a brief burst of fire to put it out of commission. The two streams engaged in a brief struggle for supremacy as they collided in midair, becoming warped as they attempted to encircle one another before extinguishing. As the rapid roar produced by the flames subsided, a multitude of glowing embers formed and slowly descended toward the ground, only to vanish upon contact with the snow. In fact, some of that snow had already been manipulated into numerous ice spikes that were floating around the blonde and pointing forward in case the threat whatever it was went on the attack. Naruto relied entirely on his instincts, which he had developed over years of fighting, to accomplish all of this in a matter of seconds. As soon as the fiery actions ended, Naruto heard several gasps of shock. He could hear the responses right in front of him and, more importantly, behind him. He was able to look at the source of the fire that had been bended at him earlier because there was nothing to divert his attention. With a look of surprise on the faces of those who weren't covered, he instantly directed his gaze to the line of Fire Nation soldiers standing ready. Why in the world are they here? As he looked at the group of roughly 20 people, Naruto thought. There was enough room between them to actively move around, and they were all shoulder to shoulder. The other half wore helmets that completely covered their heads and were armed only with their fists, indicating that they were benders, while the other half had spears and helmets that exposed their faces. They all wore the same red armor that Naruto had grown used to. A metal warship with a ground mounted ramp appeared to have crashed through the icy shores and pierced the village's wall behind them. A voice exclaimed, "Fire and waterbending? Impossible. There can't be more than one avatar?" Loudly. A young man who was standing closer than the other soldiers in the center caught Naruto's attention. His distinctive feature was the large reddened scar around his left eye, even though he wore the same armor as the others. The only thing that set him apart, aside from the furious expression on his face, was that the only hair on his head was in a black ponytail. "How the hell did I not notice him first?" Naruto muttered as the various ice spikes continued to hover around him and he remained in battle position. As he assumed his firebending stance, the scarred man exclaimed, "Who are you and how did you get here?" However, Naruto turned his head away from him and looked back at the village. It appeared as though everyone had gathered and dispersed to face the trespassers. The elderly and non-fighters were in the rear of the group, while all of the young men and women he had trained were in the front, brandishing the various spears and clubs that their tribe was renowned for. Naruto gazed affectionately at all of the young adults beneath his hood and thought, "My little warriors aren't so little anymore." With their taller stature, leaner faces almost completely free of baby fat, determined eyes, and what he assumed were well-trained bodies beneath their bulky clothing, they all grew up nicely. But he was particularly thrilled to see two faces in the center. Sokka, with a club in hand and some war paint on his face, and Katara, with her knees bent and hands out to bend water at any time, stood there in their mature forms, prepared for anything. They undoubtedly gained height. Sokka is still taller than Katara, but she now appears to be on par with Kya. With the exception of Katara's single long braid, which was now loose and spread across her upper back, their hair was styled similarly, and their faces were leaner and more mature than the others. Naturally, she also retained the hair loopies that have always existed. Then Naruto saw that they and everyone else had visible signs of happiness on their faces, but the gravity of the situation overwhelmed them. He didn't realize that a young man was standing behind Katara and Sokka, just peeking to see what was going on, until he looked around the group once more. His light skin, orange and yellow clothes, and reddish-brown boots made it clear he was not from the tribe or Fire Nation. He had a blue arrow tattooed on the top of each hand and on his bald head, and he held a brown staff. "Wait, arrow, staff, Robisa is he? Answer me," the scarred man said again. When Naruto turned to face him once more, he saw that the man's closed fists now held knives made entirely of fire. There was a brief period of silence during which everyone in the vicinity became tense and restless. There was a slight breeze, and the man appeared to be about to yell once more, but Naruto interrupted him. Everyone heard the blonde's simple statement, "It's impolite to ask for someone's name without giving yours first, Scarface." Scarface growled and appeared to be having trouble controlling his temper. His teeth were clenched as he uttered the word, "Zuko." The now identified Zuko exclaimed, "Now who are you?" as the fire in his hands seemed to grow longer in response to his rage. Before answering, Naruto muttered to himself, "Well, someone needs a hug." He began, "Who I am and how I'm here isn't important," and concluded calmly but angrily, "What is important is why the hell are you here?" "I'm here to capture the Avatar, the airbender these people are protecting." After his suspicions were confirmed, Naruto's shadowed brows lifted. "But now," Zuko said sternly, "it seems as though I might have mistaken considering you just bended fire and are still bending water. The Avatar is supposed to be an airbender, but with you here I'm not sure what to think anymore. But I do know that whether you're actually the Avatar or not, with your abilities shown you are both threats that need to be taken care of." Everyone became more tense and a little restless. "So if you don't want this village burned to the ground, you and the airbender will be coming to the Fire Nation with me," Zuko said with a stern voice. Naruto casually interrupted the solemn atmosphere by saying, How about no, I still got shit to do and being a prisoner isn't exactly one of the things on my list." Zuko appeared to only grow more irate, "I wasn't asking you." "Wait, Prince Zuko," one of the spearmen said, staring at Naruto. "What is it?" Zuko screamed, turning to face the grunt that cut him off. He shakily pointed to the object and said meekly, "The mask." "What about it?" demanded Zuko. With a bead of sweat now trickling down his brow, the spearman muttered, "The Southern Raiders." After a few moments of not seeming to follow, Zuko's eyes suddenly lit up with recognition, and he cautiously turned his head back to Naruto. Zuko asked quietly, trying to maintain his composure as his muscles tensed, "All the ships destroyed. A quarter of the forces dead. The rest forced to retire from injuries or mental instability. That was you?" The soldiers of the Fire Nation were now becoming quite concerned. Their country was deeply shocked by the loss of their finest naval force. The severely burned survivors, their eyes trembling with fear, told stories of a single man who could control gravity and replicate himself. Since they were believed to be somewhat mentally unstable, it was obviously difficult to believe, but since there were several accounts of the same incident, nobody was really sure how to interpret it. The most interesting thing, though, was that the soldiers were nearly too shaken to speak when they mentioned his eyes. After some time, they discovered that the assailant was said to have glowing purple eyes with black rings that exuded total power, possibly even godlike. After that bit of information spread, it kind of became a myth. A few months later, parents even invented the tale of the purple-eyed demon to ensure their kids behaved. The basic idea was that you would be taken away in the middle of the night and all you would see would be those demonic and deadly purple eyes if you misbehaved or disobeyed your parents. The amusing thing is that it did happen. As he processed the information, Naruto calmly answered, "Maybe it was me, maybe it wasn't. Would you like to find out? A quarter dead? At least it wasn't a full-scale massacre like he had previously believed, but the guilt that lingered after everything had subsided all those years ago persisted. Fire Nation soldiers were people, even if they were jerks." As he slowly assumed his favorite firebending stance and gazed at Naruto with daggers, Zuko said, "Just come with us calmly and there won't be a need for any fighting." Like everyone else in the room, Naruto remained silent and just gazed back at the scarred prince. They were all gradually going insane due to the almost intolerable tension in the air, waiting for the smallest movement to trigger everything. Naruto sighed deeply in exhaustion after an indeterminate period of time. "Look," he began, "I've had a long-ass day and I just want to spend the rest of it in peace. While a fight sounds fun to break my boredom, I'm not really in the mood, so you either leave or I send you back to your country in a body bag," he said with an air of serious annoyance. Zuko tried to respond either verbally or physically, but he was unable to do so because the spikes of ice instantly found their sharp ends pointing inches away at his and the other soldiers' necks. Now that they were motionless and holding their breath, they all turned to face the hooded figure, who had his right arm extended and his fingers loose as he awaited the order to control the ice. With no pun intended, Naruto said, "Final warning," in a cold tone. Zuko was almost trembling where he stood, his jaw clenched and his eyes full of rage. He reluctantly nodded ever so slowly and hardly perceptibly, with no intention of escaping or retaliating. All of the soldiers let out a mental sigh of relief as Naruto withdrew the spikes surrounding his person while they remained ready. With clumsy steps, they began to ascend the ramp back into the ship one by one, with their leader trailing behind. They all turned around one last time as they waited for the ramp to reattach itself at the top. Zuko simply said, glaring at Naruto once more, "This isn't over." Naruto appeared to have heard him as he responded, "Didn't expect it to be." He used chakra to project his voice in the direction of the intruders, ensuring that everyone heard him. The ice spikes on the ground had now turned back to snow. Naruto gave them all a final glare as the ramp was about to close, his hidden eyes slowly glowing the terrible purple they had only heard about in stories. They all recoiled at once and retreated a step before the ramp clanked loudly back into place. Shortly afterward, the ship began to emit smoke into the chilly air before departing into the open blue, revealing all of the damage it had caused outside the village. As it continued off into the horizon, Naruto watched it until it was almost entirely out of sight. After he finally declared them gone for the time being, he let out a slow breath, crossed his arms, turned off his dujutsu, and then relaxed. As he continued to look forward idly, Naruto thought to himself, well, it had to happen sometime. And now is as good as any time, I guess. I was getting really bored anyways. Before he knew it, he was being approached by several hurried footsteps that sounded like they were coming from a stampede in the crunchy snow. Knowing he was safe, he slowly looked over his left shoulder, anticipating what would happen. The massive tackle he received from a blur of blue and brown, however, caught him off guard. A noticeable trail was left in their wake as he and his assailant skidded a few feet into the snow. Now that he was on his back and covered in globs of snow, Naruto slowly looked down to his chest to see his attacker straddling him and desperately clinging to his torso. The glistening blue orbs that held so much life and innocence that he was proud to watch mature over the years met his vision in the next instant. A huge, utterly joyful smile that seemed impossible to break was fixed on the mature face that housed the eyes. He muttered in laughter, "Now look at the water princess all grown up." Katara's chin resting firmly on his chest somehow made her face even happier. She started to say something, but was stopped when Sokka's distinctive voice could be heard. "Dogpile!" he exclaimed, excited like a child, as he and everyone else behind him approached the two on the ground. Katara's eyes widened as she turned to face the approaching crowd, and then she let go of Naruto and desperately rolled a good few feet away. The hooded blonde watched the group of young adults who were instantly transformed back into excited children just by his presence, without bothering to get up from his now seated position on the snowy surface. He exclaimed, "Oh she! Oof!" as Sokka and other people landed on him one after the other, increasing the size of their pile. As they all attempted to make contact with their beloved friend, muffled shouts and laughter could be heard at various locations throughout the warrior bundle. Naruto did the only thing he could do at the time because, despite all of his shinobi power, he was unable to break free from his human prison. Before they all appeared to sink deeper into the earth, a brilliant flash of yellow burst within the pile. Before their attention was drawn to the sound of heavy breathing behind them, they were confused. When they all turned to face the source, they saw Naruto, wearing a mask and a motionless hood, bending over with his hands on his knees and breathing in the heavenly oxygen that had been kindly permitted to enter his ravenous lungs. They all knew he had used his trademark teleportation technique to get away from them because he was holding the nearly forgotten prom kunai he had used to get there in the first place. As he continued to catch his breath, Naruto muttered, "I swear everyone is trying to kill me." After a brief rest, he straightened up, cleared his throat, and waved the hand at them while holding the kunai. As the young warriors stood up, he merely said, "Yo." He watched as they scrambled to their feet and approached him more composedly. He heard several taps on his shoulder from behind as they were ready to approach him. He was not at all shocked when he turned around and saw Kya and Kana grinning, followed closely by the rest of the village. Kya's eyes were on the verge of tears as she asked, "You took your sweet time, didn't you?" A small smile appeared on his face as he replied, "Well, being on the other side of the world and fighting tends to take up a bit of my schedule." Kana smirked slightly and said, "That may be, but I'm not getting any younger, Whiskers." Naruto gave her a blank stare. "Love you too, Gran." At that, Kya and Kana both laughed a little, and several others around them joined in. They became aware of the warriors who had just arrived behind Naruto as a result. Naruto turned and stepped back after saying, "Well then." He swiftly removed the hood and mask as his shoulders faced each group, showcasing his renowned spiky blonde hair, ocean blue eyes, whisker lines on his slender face, and a dazzling foxy smile. As was to be expected, he spread his arms wide and glanced from Katara and Sokka to Kya and Kana. A proper hug this time? They instinctively put their arms around one another and relished the physical and emotional warmth. After they had all had their fill, they took a step back and briefly grinned at one another. The silence was broken when Kya said, "You certainly haven't changed a bit, haven't you, Naruto?" As soon as the Water Tribe mother finished speaking, Naruto's thoughts turned to Kurama's discovery. About that, Naruto started to say, but a deep, animal-like moaning from behind interrupted him. When he turned around, he saw a huge bison with all of its fur white except for a brown stripe running horizontally across its back and a perfectly formed arrow on its head. All that was left were its 6 limbs, 2 pointed, curved horns, a large nose, and the saddle that was fastened to its back. Naruto stood perplexed and said, Naruto pointed his index finger at the giant bison and asked in a monotone, "What's a giant bison doing here?" At that moment, he noticed the same young man from earlier, who was patiently and perplexedly petting the side of the beast's head. After realizing the connection, Naruto thought, "Oh." Naruto pondered for a few moments before beginning to approach the bald boy with a composed gait. Naruto saw that the newcomer noticed him right away and began to approach him, seemingly meeting him halfway. Neither of them knew exactly what to say once they were directly in front of one another, close to the broken snow wall. A straightforward stare-down ensued, but the blonde shinobi broke it up. Assuming that the young airbender was calm and technically a non-hostile guest, Naruto smiled his signature smile and extended his gloved hand. "Glad to see someone finally appreciates the holy color of orange. I'm Naruto. What's your name, Arrowhead?" The young man initially appeared a little confused, but then a glimmer of laughter appeared in his eyes, and a broad smile of his own appeared as he enthusiastically shook the welcoming hand. "I'm Aang." The sounds of various activities could be heard throughout the southern Water Tribe as its different tribesmen worked to finish preparations for the return of their blonde friend. Men, women, and kids were rushing back and forth setting up tables and chairs, carrying a wide range of foods and ingredients that were specific to their culture, digging fire pits, and removing any leftover debris that had been left over from Prince Zuko's earlier incursion. Every member of the tribe took the time to greet Naruto back with hugs, high fives, fist bumps, and even the occasional small peck on the cheek from the female population, despite the intense workload they were all engaged in. Because of their prior non-existence and their lack of recognition of the blonde shinobi, Naruto took them all in stride and made sure to give them all the attention he could, especially to the newborns and very young children just out of their toddler years. Although Naruto never gave it much thought, he developed a kind of paternal affection for the young warriors and kids in general after spending the years he did with them as children. Because of Konohamaru, Moegi, and Udon, he already possessed the qualities of a big brother, but his stay in the wintry environment only strengthened them. Because of this, he didn't think twice about holding the infants in his arms and cooing at Tama to his slight embarrassment when it was pointed out and engaging in lively conversation with the younger children who were introduced and then engaged in small talk. His immediate surrogate family, which included Katara, Sokka, Kya, Kana, and the newcomer Aang, watched all of this with joy in the background. Naruto continued to press the young airbender for information, but he only managed to get his name before someone yelled for a feast to be prepared right away. Before beginning the work that was still in progress, there was a single, loud cheer of agreement. Aang kept a close eye on everything going on around him. He was still recovering from the startling realization that he had been gone from the world for 100 years, that he was the first airbender these people or, it seems, anyone in the world had seen in the same period of time, that his title as the Avatar was no longer concealed, and that everyone had forgotten him in favor of this man who was clearly not a native like him. Just who is this guy? Aang pondered with sincere interest. All he knew from the brief exchange he had with him moments earlier was that his name was Naruto. It was undoubtedly an unusual name, but he had heard of stranger ones from some of his own travels all those years ago. Aside from his name, he did believe that the blonde was a decent person based on everyone's interactions with him, and that was sufficient in his opinion. For almost an hour, Naruto kept talking to people who wanted his attention while the small group of people waiting next to him occasionally offered their opinions and happily let things play out naturally. Naruto exhaled and turned to face Aang shortly after the last family had finished speaking to him, immediately capturing his interest. He grinned and said simply, "Now that that's over with, it's about time we got talking, Arrowhead." Aang gave a mock salute, nodded, and smiled back. "Sure thing, Whiskers," he said authoritatively and naively. A frown swiftly formed on Naruto's face before he squinted and gave Kana a blank stare. He said, "You're such a bad influence, Gran." Naruto responded with a defeated sigh and a few small giggles. "Well then, how?" A random tribe member shouted, "Everything's ready," and everyone began to assemble in the middle of the village. Naruto gave a mental shrug. "How about we talk during dinner?" After nodding, Aang and the others began to move to their designated locations amidst the celebration. The villagers got together without much trouble, grabbed whatever food and beverages they wanted, and sat with their loved ones talking about whatever was on their minds. Eventually, though, they all made an effort to hear what their resident ninja had to say. Naruto laughed as he concluded one of his many antics, and then after we set up all of the mines, Bato and I got the leftover skunk fish, put it all in a big bucket, and dumped it on Hakoda after he got done bathing. He couldn't get rid of the smell for a month, he said. Everyone who heard laughed in unison, and Sokka even began to choke on the large spoonful of sea prunes he had just begun to chew. Sokka cleared his throat with a couple of frantic slaps on Kya's back. After giving his mother a brief thank you, he immediately returned to the pile of food in front of him. While others watched in laughter, Kya could only shake her head in mild frustration. Naruto began, "It kind of backfired on us, though, as he regained his bearings. We always had to stick around him with patrols and other things, so we were forced to keep smelling it." He concluded with a sheepish laugh that was shared by all. When Naruto had calmed down, he turned to see that Aang had not even touched his bowl of stewed sea prunes. Naruto questioned, "Arrowhead, are you not a fan of sea prunes?" Now that he was receiving some attention, Aang smiled sheepishly and embarrassingly, saying, Water tribe food hasn't always been my favorite, sorry." Naruto understood and nodded. Sea prunes are undoubtedly a special delicacy, but some of the foods these people consumed were definitely acquired tastes. But Naruto decided to have some fun and asked, "Have you even tried them?" with a predatory twinkle in his eye. Aang shook his head negatively, but a worried expression quickly appeared on his pallid face as he realized what the conversation was about. Naruto's well-known foxy smile covered his entire face, forcing him to close his eyes. Without altering his expression, he leaned slightly in the direction of the airbender across the long table and said, "Well, what are you waiting for?" With a challenging whisper, he said, "Try it." Aang glanced at Naruto, then at the steaming bowl in front of him, and finally at everyone who was now leaning in to see how he would respond. Now that he knew there was no way out of this, dread filled his gut. The smell of the stew was enough to make him wish he could at least survive. He reluctantly took the offered spoon, carefully picked up a large piece of sea prune, and shakily brought it to his lips. Aang could have sworn that his previous incarnations were also perched on the edge of their spiritual seats, particularly those of the water tribe, because the atmosphere was so thick with anticipation. The food finally reached the young avatar's taste buds after what seemed like an eternity. The events that followed would cause widespread hysteria, which hardly ever occurred. His expression changed to one of extreme shock and disgust as soon as the water tribe cuisine touched his tongue. As the poor sea prune was rejected and fell back into the bowl, his eyes bugged out and gazed off into space as if they had seen the Shinigami itself. His shoulders wrinkled up as if to touch his ears, and his tongue somehow hung out past his chin. After just a half-second, Naruto burst out laughing so hard that he almost gave Kana a heart attack. However, he wasn't alone. Once Naruto began to get worked up, everyone else couldn't stand it and started laughing uncontrollably. Aang just sat there, blushing, looking around after his taste buds were violated. But the embarrassment was short-lived because he actually began laughing when he realized how ridiculous he looked. Naruto placed a hand on his sore side and occasionally let out a little laugh. "Oh man, that was great. I definitely needed that after everything that happened." Aang rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and said, well, you're welcome, I guess. "That didn't really surprise me, though. I didn't like them either when I tried them the first time," said Naruto.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.